Hi guys, tonight we're stepping into a young nation standing at the edge of something impossibly vast. In front of you lies a continent that seems endless, stretching beyond rivers, forests, plains and mountains that most Americans have never seen. Maps fade into blank spaces. Rumours fill the silence beyond them. Somewhere out there are fertile valleys, powerful nations, dangerous winters, and possibilities large enough to reshape millions of lives. You can almost hear wagon wheels that have not yet rolled axes that have not yet struck timber, and campfires that have not yet burned under western skies. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you are listening from. Now dim the lights. It is the year 1803. The air smells of wet earth and horse sweat. Paper maps crackle under careful hands. Ink dries slowly on diplomatic documents that very few ordinary citizens yet understand. But something enormous has just happened. The United States has purchased a massive territory from France in what becomes known as the Louisiana Purchase. The scale feels almost absurd. For about $15 million, the young republic acquires roughly 800,000 square miles of land. The country nearly doubles in size overnight. Imagine buying half a continent with paperwork, signatures and negotiation. It sounds almost suspiciously convenient, like finding a mansion listed online for the price of a used truck. Yet the land is real, very real. Much of it remains unfamiliar to American settlers. Rivers twist through thick wilderness. Prairie grasses rise shoulder high. Winters can kill quietly. Summers can bake the ground until cracks split the earth. And most importantly, this land is not empty. That matters. Native nations have lived, traded, hunted, governed, and fought across these lands for generations far older than the United States itself. The Osage Nation, Lakota Mandan, and countless others already understand the river's migration routes, seasons, and dangers in ways newcomers cannot. That truth will shape everything that follows. From the eastern states, ordinary Americans hear whispers about opportunity. Cheap land, rich soil, independence, a fresh start. That phrase becomes powerful. A fresh start. You can understand the appeal. Life in the eastern states is not easy. Land ownership remains difficult for many farmers. Population growth pressures small communities. Poor harvests can destroy family finances. Debt hangs over households like a permanent storm cloud. So western land begins to feel like salvation, or at least possibility. Historians at Harvard University note that access to land became one of the strongest engines of early American expansion, helping shape both economic ambition and national identity. Land meant food status inheritance, and freedom from dependence on landlords or creditors. In simple terms, land meant control over your future. That dream becomes addictive. Your mind drifts into a modest farmhouse in Virginia or Pennsylvania. Candle smoke curls upward. Supper is plain. Perhaps cornbread, salted pork and beans. A father studies a newspaper by dim firelight. A mother mends clothing worn thin at the elbows. Children fight sleep on wooden chairs. Then someone mentions western land. The room changes. Not physically, emotionally. Hope enters. Maybe not this year, they say, maybe not next year, but someday west. That single word starts living inside countless homes. West. Of course, dreams are easier than reality. The frontier is not a magical blank canvas waiting politely for settlers. Roads are limited, bridges are rare, supply chains are fragile. Medical care is primitive. A broken wheel or infected wound can become catastrophic. Even information travels slowly. A letter may take weeks, news may take months. Rumours may outrun facts by entire seasons. Some accounts describe western soil as endlessly fertile. Others warn of isolation so profound that silence itself becomes oppressive. Historians still debate how much early migration was driven by economic necessity versus cultural mythology. Scholars at Yale University argue that the idea of westward movement became tied not only to opportunity, but also to a growing belief that expansion was somehow natural, even inevitable. That belief becomes dangerous later, because inevitability can excuse almost anything. For now, though, the average settler does not think in grand ideology. Most think smaller. Can we feed the children? Can we own land? Can we survive winter? Can we begin again? Those questions feel human, very human. Outside city halls and political chambers, practical preparations begin. Blacksmiths repair tools, wagon makers discuss axle strength, surveyors study rivers, traders calculate supply routes, and everywhere maps. Paper maps on tables, folded maps in saddlebags, crude maps copied by hand. Many remain inaccurate. Some are laughably optimistic. A river marked as gentle may flood violently in spring. A path shown as reliable may vanish into marshland. A settlement noted as thriving may consist of 3 cabins and 1 stubborn mule. Still, maps offer something priceless. Direction, or at least the illusion of it. You can almost feel the strange emotional split of 1803. America is both confident and uncertain, proud and fragile, ambitious and naive. A teenager, really. Big dreams, limited experience. The frontier magnifies all of that. In eastern cities, politicians debate power, merchants discuss trade, newspapers argue over the wisdom of expansion. Meanwhile, ordinary families quietly make life-changing decisions. Sell the farm. Stay put. Move west. No spreadsheet helps. No weather app warns you. No online reviews of frontier destinations. Just instinct, rumour and faith. In a way, the American pioneer story begins not with wagons, but with imagination. Before anyone crosses a river or fells a tree, they first picture a different life. That image matters. A cabin of their own, children inheriting land, wheat fields rippling in sun, livestock growing fat before winter, no landlord, no debt collector, no crowded town limiting every possibility. Whether that vision proves real is another question. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it breaks people. Sometimes both happen at once. As night falls across the young republic, fireplaces glow behind thousands of windows. Horses stamp in muddy yards. Dogs bark at distant movement. Wind pushes softly against wooden walls. Inside many homes, conversation returns to one place. The West. Not yet fully known, not yet fully understood, but already powerful enough to pull on the national imagination like gravity. Soon explorers will go farther. Settlers will follow. Wagons will multiply. Trails will form. Forests will fall to axes. Towns will rise where grass once moved untouched in the wind. And with every mile, the pioneer story will grow more inspiring, more painful and far more complicated than early dreamers can imagine. For now, though, you sit in that moment of beginning. The map has changed. The future has widened, and somewhere beyond the Mississippi a continent waits. Quietly, impossibly, patiently. Morning arrives, cold and damp along the banks of the Mississippi River. Mist hovers above the water like breath held between worlds. Wet leather creaks. Oars knock softly against wood. Boots sink into river mud with a sound no one finds heroic. This is exploration in real life. Less glorious than paintings. More exhausting than legends. In 1804, President Thomas Jefferson sends an expedition westward under Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their mission sounds simple when written on paper. Map the land acquired in the Louisiana Purchase, study plants and animals, establish relations with native nations, search for a practical water route to the Pacific. Simple goals, very complicated execution. You stand with a core of discovery as supplies are loaded. Gunpowder is carefully sealed. Scientific instruments are wrapped in cloth. Journals are protected from moisture. Every object matters because replacement is nearly impossible. A broken tool may remain broken. A spoiled barrel stays spoiled. Nothing is convenient. Historians at Stanford University note that the expedition represented both scientific inquiry and strategic statecraft. Jefferson wanted knowledge, yes, but also influence. Whoever mapped and understood the frontier would shape its future. Knowledge becomes power, especially on blank maps. The boats push forward. Water splashes against the hull. Mosquitoes swarm in warm weather. Summer heat becomes sticky and oppressive. Men sweat through wool clothing that feels designed by someone who deeply misunderstands comfort. You almost feel sorry for them. Almost. At night, campfires burn low. Smoke keeps insects away, though never enough. Wet socks dry slowly. Meat cooks over flame. Some men write letters they may never send. Others simply stare west. That direction changes everything. The expedition records extraordinary detail. Lewis carefully documents species unknown to Eastern science. Prairie dogs astonish observers. Massive bison herds move like living weather systems. Grizzly bears inspire considerably less scientific calm and much more immediate panic. Fair enough. A grizzly charging at you tends to simplify priorities. Archival records later studied by scholars at University of Chicago show how essential detailed observation became. The expedition did not merely travel, it translated landscape into usable information for a growing nation. That distinction matters. To settlers back east, Western land is still mostly imagination. To explorers, it becomes measurable. Rivers gain names, distances gain numbers, mountains gain routes. Uncertainty narrows, slowly, but exploration never happens in isolation. The Corps repeatedly encounters native communities whose knowledge proves essential. Trade routes already exist. Diplomatic networks already function. Geographic knowledge already lives in memory language and oral tradition. The Americans are not entering emptiness. They are entering existing worlds. That truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Mandan villages along the upper Missouri impress the expedition deeply. Earth lodges offer warmth against brutal winters. Agriculture supports stable communities. Trade networks stretch across astonishing distances. For a moment it feels as though the idea of frontier civilization becomes upside down. Who exactly is civilized? The answer depends heavily on who is speaking. Winter comes hard. Very hard. Snow settles thick across camp. The air turns sharp enough to sting inside your nose. Frozen fingers struggle with rope and metal. Breath clouds instantly in morning darkness. Cold becomes intimate. It gets everywhere. In journals, Lewis and Clark describe relentless weather illness, exhaustion and discipline required to keep morale intact. Yet something else keeps appearing in their records. Wonder. That matters too. A river bend opens into impossible distance. Elk move across frosted plains. Night skies blaze with stars beyond counting. Silence expands until even speech feels intrusive. You feel small, not in a bad way, just honest. The expedition's most famous companion eventually joins during the journey. Sacagawea, carrying her infant son, travels with the group as interpreter and guide. Her presence changes outcomes repeatedly. She helps navigate diplomacy. She identifies edible plants. She strengthens trust with native groups. And perhaps most importantly, her presence signals peaceful intent. A war party rarely travels with a woman carrying a baby. That detail saves tension more than once. Historians from Columbia University emphasize that Sacagawea's contributions have often been simplified in popular memory. She was not a magical, single-handed guide through every wilderness obstacle. Reality is more nuanced. Yet her knowledge and presence clearly mattered. Historians still debate the precise scale of her influence in certain key decisions, because surviving records remain incomplete and sometimes frustratingly vague. That uncertainty feels very human. History rarely arrives perfectly labelled. The farther west the expedition travels, the harsher the terrain becomes. Rivers resist progress. Canoes scrape rock. Portaging's equipment over land drains energy fast. Mountains rise ahead. The Rocky Mountains do not care about ambition. They simply exist. Huge, cold, indifferent. Crossing them becomes brutal. Snow lingers. Food runs short. Men weaken. Horses struggle. Leather is chewed for sustenance when provisions fail. That detail stays with you. Imagine hunger so persistent that leather begins to resemble dinner. No menu options. No comfort. Just survival. And yet they keep moving. Why? because turning back would also cost everything. Exploration creates momentum. Once deep enough into unknown territory, retreat becomes emotionally difficult. Progress becomes its own logic. Keep going. Just keep going. Finally, western waters appear. Rivers begin flowing toward the Pacific. Hope sharpens, energy returns. The scent of damp evergreen forests replaces dry prairie air. Rain falls heavy. Salt wind eventually reaches them. Then comes the ocean. At last, the Pacific Ocean stretches outward under grey skies. Waves crash with deep rolling force. After years of travel, the western edge of the continent stands before them. It is not a triumphant trumpet moment. It is quieter, colder, wetter, more exhausted. Real achievement often feels like that. Less cinematic, more tired. Lewis and Clark return east with maps, journals, specimens, and stories powerful enough to transform public imagination. Their expedition proves that continental travel is possible even if brutally difficult. That changes pioneer psychology. Before the West was mystery, now it becomes destination. Not easy, not safe, but reachable. Scholars at Harvard University note that exploration reports helped accelerate migration by replacing rumor with structured knowledge. Even incomplete information reduces fear. Maps create courage, sometimes misplaced courage. Still courage. As their findings spread, something shifts in thousands of homes across the eastern United States. Farmers, merchants, laborers, and dreamers hear new stories. Fertile valleys, open plains, rivers for trade. Land, always land. The pioneer dream grows stronger. Not because the journey sounds easy, because difficulty now feels survivable. Someone made it west. Others can too. And so the idea takes root. Beyond rivers and forests lies not merely wilderness but possibility. Soon axes will swing, cabins will rise, wagon trails will deepen into roads. Settlers will follow pathways first clarified by exploration. The maps are still imperfect, but they are no longer blank. And blank spaces once named rarely remain empty for long. The sound reaches you first. Metal striking wood. Sharp, rhythmic, repetitive. Thunk. Pause. Thunk. An axe bites into oak with stubborn resistance. Chips scatter across damp ground. Sweat runs down a settler's back despite the morning chill. His palms are blistered. His shoulders burn. He keeps swinging anyway. Because stopping solves nothing. Welcome to frontier settlement. No dramatic soundtrack. Just labour. Endless labour. By the early 1810s and 1820s, the first major waves of American settlers begin pushing deeper beyond established eastern communities. Exploration has inspired them. Government land policies encourage them. Stories from neighbours convince them. But dreams do not build houses. Hands do. Your mind drifts to a newly arrived family somewhere in Kentucky, Ohio, or the edge of Indiana. They've arrived with tools, seed, livestock, cookware, blankets, and perhaps far too much optimism. That last item weighs the most. They stand before dense woodland, towering trees, roots thick as furniture, brush tangled like wire. No open farm waits for them. Every usable acre must be carved from wilderness. Historians at University of California note that clearing land was among the most physically demanding tasks faced by early American pioneers. A single acre of mature forest could require weeks of exhausting labour with hand tools alone. Think about that. 1 acre. Weeks, and most families need far more than one, so the work begins immediately. Trees are cut, branches are stripped, stumps remain stubborn obstacles. Burn piles smoke for days. Ash settles over clothes, hair, and food until everything tastes faintly of charcoal. Even soup. Especially soup. Cabin construction becomes the next urgent priority. Shelter cannot wait for perfection. Weather does not care about architectural dreams. The first cabins are rough. Very rough. Logs are stacked horizontally. Notches are cut by hand so corners interlock. Gaps between logs are filled with clay mud moss, or a mixture called chinking. Roofs are often made from split wood shingles or bark. A cabin might measure 16 by 18 feet. sometimes smaller, much smaller, and inside that tiny space lives an entire family. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, occasionally livestock in severe weather. Privacy barely exists. Intimacy becomes unavoidable. The smell inside is unforgettable. Wood smoke, damp wool, wet leather boots, animal fat, sweat, earth, sometimes sickness. It is not pleasant, but it means survival. A fireplace dominates one wall. Fire becomes center kitchen, heater, light source, drying station, and emotional anchor all at once. Lose fire in winter and danger arrives fast. Cold enters quietly, then completely. You notice intimate details that grand history books often skip. A mother hangs herbs from ceiling beams to dry. A child sleeps under patch quilts stuffed with feathers. A father repairs cracked tool handles by firelight after dark because daylight belongs to field work. Small actions matter. They hold life together. According to research from Yale University, early frontier households often operated near subsistence levels during their first years. Crop failure, illness, or livestock loss could quickly push families into crisis. That instability creates constant background stress, even during calm days. Especially during calm days, because calm gives you time to worry. What if the corn fails? What if fever spreads? What if winter comes early? What if wolves take livestock? What if someone breaks a leg? That last question feels especially cruel. No hospital nearby. No ambulance. No antibiotics. Just distance and hope. Food production dominates life. Corn becomes essential because it grows relatively reliably and provides calories. Bean, squash and root vegetables supplement diets. Hunting adds meat when possible. Salted pork, smoked venison, wild turkey, rabbit and fish appear when luck allows. When luck disappears, meals shrink. Cold soup becomes dinner. Sometimes just cornmeal mush. That is enough to keep going. Barely. For a moment it feels as though time itself changes on the frontier. Sunrise dictates labour. Sunset ends visibility. Seasons control survival. Nature becomes boss, landlord and judge. You answer to weather now. Nothing else matters more. Summer brings mosquitoes thick enough to drive people mad. Humidity turns shirts heavy. Fields demand endless weeding. Thunderstorms flood trails and flatten fragile crops. Autumn brings harvest urgency. Winter brings fear. Spring brings mud. So much mud. Boots sink ankle deep. Wagon wheels vanish halfway into roads that barely deserve the name. Horses struggle. Supplies arrive late or not at all. Mud sounds boring, until it traps survival. Social life exists, but sparsely. Neighbours may live miles apart, visits require planning, church gatherings, barn raisings and communal harvest work become precious social anchors. Humans need humans, even stubborn pioneers. Maybe especially stubborn pioneers. Historians still debate whether frontier isolation strengthened independence or deepened psychological hardship. Scholars at Princeton University suggest both were true. Isolation fostered resilience, but also loneliness, depression, and emotional strain rarely documented in official records. That silence is telling. People wrote less about emotional exhaustion. They simply endured it. Or tried to. Children grow fast in this world. Not biologically, of course. Emotionally. A 7-year-old may gather firewood daily. A 10-year-old may help plough. A 12-year-old may manage livestock or supervise younger siblings. Childhood becomes practical. Play still exists, but duty arrives early. One intimate detail appears often in surviving letters. Shoes were precious, very precious. Many children went barefoot in warm months to preserve footwear for winter. That small fact says a lot. Comfort becomes seasonal luxury. Yet pioneers are not only suffering machines. There is joy too, important joy. A cleared field after months of labour feels miraculous. The first successful harvest brings relief so deep it feels sacred. A healthy calf born in spring can improve an entire family's future. Fresh bread after weeks of repetitive meals feels almost luxurious. Pleasure shrinks, meaning grows. A fiddle appears at gatherings. Someone sings, children laugh during snowfalls, couples dance on rough floorboards. Stories travel between cabins by candlelight. For a few hours hardship loosens. Not gone, just lighter. And slowly settlements stabilise. One cabin becomes 3. 3 become 10. A blacksmith arrives, then a mill, then perhaps a general store where tools, salt nails and gossip exchange hands. Civilization grows incrementally, board by board, nail by nail. Pioneer life also transforms the landscape. Forests fall, fields spread, hunting patterns change, rivers become transport routes, wildlife retreats from settlement zones. This change is not subtle, it is permanent, and not everyone welcomes it. Native communities watch expanding settlements with growing concern. What settlers call improvement often means displacement for those already living nearby. Conflict is approaching. You can feel it. But for now you remain in the intimate struggle of first settlement. A cabin stands where forest stood months earlier. Smoke rises through cold air. Fire crackles inside. A child sleeps. A woman kneads dough with tired hands. A man sharpens an axe worn by relentless use. Outside, darkness deepens. Wolves howl somewhere distant. The family listens, then returns to routine. Because tomorrow means more chopping, more clearing, more building, more becoming. The pioneer dream is no longer abstract land on a map. It has walls now. Rough walls. Crooked walls. But walls that hold. And inside them a new life begins. The wagon complains before it moves. Wood groans, iron rims scrape stone, leather harness straps tighten with slow resistance as horses lean into weight that feels unreasonable because it is unreasonable. A family has somehow attempted to fit an entire life into a rolling wooden box. Blankets, flour sacks, iron pots, seed bags, tools, clothing, a cradle, perhaps a Bible wrapped in cloth. Perhaps grandmother's clock because sentiment often defeats logic. The clock will not enjoy the trip. Neither will anyone else. By the 1820s and 1830s, movement west becomes more organised, more visible and far more common. What was once scattered settlement begins turning into migration streams. Roads improve slightly. River travel expands. Land offices process growing numbers of claims. And wagons multiply everywhere. You stand near a muddy road in Missouri often called the Gateway to the West. The smell is unforgettable. Horse breath hangs warm in cool morning air. Wet leather carries a sharp earthy scent. Wood smoke drifts from campfires where coffee boils black and bitter. People are leaving, not visiting, leaving. That emotional weight matters. Departure means finality. Many pioneers understand they may never again see the town church or graveyard they grew up with. Letters may travel back east, but bodies often do not. Goodbyes feel heavier because of that. Historians at Columbia University note that westward migration often involved not only economic calculation, but profound emotional rupture. Families willingly exchanged familiar hardship for unfamiliar uncertainty. That trade is psychologically enormous. You watch a mother hugging her sister too long. Neither wants to release first. A father shakes hands with neighbours while pretending not to feel grief. Children sometimes feel excitement instead of sorrow. Lucky children. They do not yet understand distance. Adults do. Then wheels turn, and life divides into before and after. Travel by wagon is slower than modern imagination likes to admit. Much slower. Average progress may be 10 to 15 miles per day under decent conditions. Less when weather turns bad. Much less when repairs are needed. And repairs are always needed. Axles crack, wheels loosen, animals tire, harnesses fray, ropes snap, rain swells wood, sun dries it again. Ocean itself becomes maintenance. Constant maintenance. Your mind drifts inside one wagon. Space is brutally limited. Despite popular images, many pioneers do not ride comfortably inside wagons for long distances. Wagons bounce violently over rough terrain. Walking beside them is often easier. Not pleasant, just less miserable. So adults walk. A lot. Miles and miles. Boot soles wear thin. Dust coats skin and clothing until everyone looks equally tired and equally brown. In dry weather, wagon wheels throw fine powder into the air. It settles everywhere. Hair, food, teeth, especially teeth. Crunching grit while eating becomes oddly normal. Road quality varies from poor to insulting. Some roads are little more than widened paths. Rain transforms them into mud trenches. Streams without bridges must be crossed carefully. One bad crossing can destroy supplies. Water becomes enemy fast. A wagon tipping in a river is disaster. Flour turns useless. Blankets soak, tools sink, children panic, animals struggle. Recovery is exhausting, sometimes impossible. Research from University of Chicago shows that transport infrastructure played a major role in settlement patterns. Migration followed routes with access to roads, navigable, rivers, ferries, and supply points. Geography quietly controlled ambition. Maps suggest freedom. Terrain imposes rules, always. Still, migration continues because the rewards seem worth it. Government land sales attract farmers, speculators buy acreage hoping for profit. Veterans seek land grants. Immigrants arriving from Ireland, Germany, and elsewhere increasingly join Western settlement. The frontier becomes culturally mixed. Accents blend. Customs mix. Recipes travel. You might hear fiddle music from one camp, hymns from another, and arguments about politics from all of them. Some things never change. Camp routine develops its own rhythm. At dusk, wagons circle or cluster near water when possible. Fires are built. Animals are checked for injury. Meals are cooked with practical efficiency. Beans again. Salt pork again. Coffee always appreciated. Very appreciated. Even weak coffee feels luxurious after 10 hours on the trail. For a moment it feels almost peaceful. Flames flicker. Children chase each other near camp. Someone tells exaggerated stories. Someone else complains about sore feet with dramatic seriousness. Then silence settles. Exhausted silence. That kind of silence feels different from sleep. It comes when bodies simply stop negotiating with fatigue. Pioneer journals reveal intimate anxieties rarely shown in heroic paintings. Parents worry about illness. Pregnant women fear labour far from help. Elderly travellers struggle with physical strain. Small children become vulnerable to fever infection and exposure. Ordinary vulnerability travels with every wagon. No heroic editing, just human fragility. Historians still debate how much westward migration was driven by genuine opportunity versus speculative optimism fueled by promoters and land sellers. Scholars at Harvard University argue that promotional literature often exaggerated fertile land and minimized risk. That sounds familiar. Marketing has always existed, only the fonts changed. Some migrants arrive prepared, others arrive catastrophically naive. You can often guess which is which by wagon weight. New travellers love packing unnecessary items, heavy furniture, decorative objects, excess cookware, elegant chairs that somehow seemed essential back home. Then hills arrive. Reality teaches fast. Every extra pound matters. Many possessions are abandoned along trails, broken trunks, furniture, books, tools beyond carrying capacity. The road becomes a museum of revised priorities. Need strips illusion, mercilessly. One intimate detail from surviving accounts stands out. Many families carried seeds wrapped carefully in cloth or paper. Corn seed, bean seed, wheat seed. Tiny packets of future survival. That image stays with you. Not gold. Not jewels, seeds, because pioneers often migrate not toward wealth but toward continuity. They want tomorrow to grow from today. Planting symbolizes that hope, emotionally and literally. Weather remains unpredictable. Summer heat causes dehydration. Sudden storms soak bedding. Lightning terrifies animals. Winter travel can become deadly if timing is poor. Cold changes everything. Frozen fingers struggle with buckles. Ice makes wheels dangerous. Wind penetrates layered clothing until warmth feels theoretical. And yet the wagons continue west. Why? Because momentum becomes belief. Every mile travelled makes turning back harder. Pride joins necessity. Families tell themselves the same quiet truth again and again. We have come too far. That phrase carries pioneers through misery more often than inspiration does. Not passion, commitment. That distinction matters. By the late 1830s, the westward movement has become undeniable. Trails deepen from repeated passage, supply towns grow busier, ferrymen profit, blacksmiths stay overwhelmed. A system is emerging, still rough, still dangerous, but increasingly permanent. You stand beside the road as another wagon train disappears toward the horizon. Canvas covers ripple in wind. Wheel tracks cut fresh lines into earth. Children wave, dogs bark, then distance swallows them. Ahead lies prairie mountain hardship and transformation. Behind lies the known world, and between them rolls the wagon, heavy with possessions, heavier with dreams. The first sign of tension is not gunfire, it is silence. Conversation slows, smiles become measured, trade pauses half a second too long, eyes track movement with careful attention. Hands stay closer to weapons, though no one wants to admit why. That is how many frontier conflicts begin. Not with explosions, with distrust. As settlers move farther west through the 1820s and 1830s, wagon wheels do not simply cross empty grassland. They enter territories long inhabited by native nations, whose political systems, alliances, rivalries, and trade networks already shape the land. That reality complicates every pioneer story. It must. The frontier is not a blank stage waiting for settlers to arrive and begin history. History is already there, deeply rooted, generational, sacred in ways newcomers often fail to understand. You stand near a trading post somewhere west of the Mississippi River. Smoke rises from cook fires, horses stamp in packed dirt. Fur traders bargain over hides, metal tools, cloth tobacco and ammunition. Trade creates contact. Contact creates opportunity and tension. The same iron axe that helps a native hunter clear wood may also strengthen dependency on trade goods. The same rifle that improves hunting efficiency can shift military balance between tribes. European and American goods move through indigenous economies with profound consequences. Nothing remains unchanged. Historians at Stanford University note that frontier relations were never simply war or peace. Most interactions existed in a shifting spectrum of diplomacy, commerce, coexistence, mistrust, alliance and violence. That nuance matters. Popular memory often prefers simple stories. Reality refuses simplicity. Many early settlers rely heavily on native knowledge. They learn local weather patterns, edible plants, water routes, and seasonal animal behavior. Without such knowledge, survival becomes much harder, sometimes impossible. Your mind drifts to a pioneer family lost after leaving a known trail. Water runs low, anxiety rises. Then a native guide helps redirect them toward a river crossing or settlement. That happened. More often than later, mythology admitted. And yet gratitude rarely prevented future conflict. Because the central issue remains land. Always land. Settlers want permanent farms, fences, and ownership claims backed by American law. Many native nations understand land through communal stewardship, seasonal use hunting grounds, and sacred geography rather than private sale. Those worldviews collide. Hard! A settler may see unused farmland. A native community may see hunting territory essential to winter survival. Same land, different meaning. That difference becomes explosive. Research from Yale University emphasizes that frontier conflict often emerged from incompatible assumptions about land use sovereignty and legal authority, not merely isolated violence between individuals. In simpler terms, people argued over reality itself. Who owns this place? Who decides? Who belongs? No easy answer satisfies everyone. Treaties become central tools of expansion. American officials negotiate agreements with native nations often under unequal pressure. Some treaties involve payment or trade concessions. Others involve coercion, strategic manipulation, or outright deception. Paper becomes weapon, quiet weapon, sometimes more effective than guns. Historians still debate the degree to which certain treaty signatories fully represented broader tribal consensus. since many agreements were signed amid internal political disagreement or intense external pressure. That uncertainty matters greatly, because one signature could affect thousands. You feel the emotional strain inside native communities. Elders argue over strategy, resist, negotiate, relocate temporarily, trade for survival, fight if necessary. No option feels safe. Meanwhile, settlers keep arriving. Not dozens, hundreds, then thousands. Movement changes scale. Roads become trails, trails become corridors, hunting grounds shrink, game patterns shift as settlement expands, forests fall to axes, rivers carry increasing traffic. The land itself begins changing. Fast. One intimate human detail from frontier accounts appears repeatedly. Livestock wandering into native crop fields could trigger serious conflict. A loose cow sounds almost absurd compared with grand historical narratives. Yet such incidents mattered. A trampled field meant food loss. Food loss meant winter risk. Suddenly a wandering animal becomes political. Small events ignite large consequences. Fear deepens misunderstanding. Rumours travel faster than facts. One stolen horse becomes exaggerated into organised attack. One violent raid becomes justification for collective retaliation. Panic simplifies enemies. Dangerously. For a moment it feels as though every frontier settlement develops its own rumour cycle. They attacked a wagon. They burned a cabin. They stole livestock. Some reports are true. Some are distorted. Some are invented entirely. Fear rarely waits for evidence. Military forts begin appearing with increasing frequency. The United States Army expands presence near contested regions. Soldiers build outposts, patrol routes, escort settlers, and project federal authority. Authority on paper, not always in practice. Frontier military life is harsh. Forts are often isolated, undersupplied, and uncomfortable. Mud disease, insects, and loneliness define daily existence more than battle does. Even soldiers feel trapped between worlds. Not fully settlers, not fully locals, just stationed, watching. Tension rises dramatically in the southeastern United States as removal policies gain political support. Under President Andrew Jackson, federal pressure for native removal intensifies during the 1830s. This becomes one of the darkest chapters in American expansion. The Indian Removal Act authorizes forced relocation of native peoples east of the Mississippi to lands farther west. The stated logic emphasizes security and settlement. The human cost is devastating. Communities are uprooted, homes abandoned, graves left behind, sacred places lost. Families endure forced marches under brutal conditions. The most infamous example becomes the Trail of Tears involving the Cherokee Nation and other southeastern tribes. Cold, hunger, disease, and exhaustion kill thousands. The suffering echoes for generations. That pain must be acknowledged in any honest pioneer history, because pioneer expansion created both opportunity and dispossession. Both truths coexist. Neither cancels the other. That complexity defines the American frontier. You return to the smaller human scale. A pioneer family sits by candlelight inside a rough cabin. Outside, dogs bark at distant movement. A mother quiets anxious children. A father checks his rifle not from aggression but fear. Across the same dark landscape, a native family sits around firelight discussing new settlers cutting timber near ancestral land. Parents worry about food safety and the future of their children. Notice the mirror. Fear exists on both sides. Love exists on both sides. Home matters to both. That realization hurts, because conflict often grows between people who each believe they are protecting family and survival. By the late 1830s, frontier conflict is no longer occasional friction. It has become structural. Expansion guarantees increasing pressure. Settlers keep coming. Native resistance continues. Government policy hardens. Violence becomes more frequent. The pioneer story now carries a permanent shadow. Not only ambition, not only resilience, loss too, deep loss. And as the frontier stretches farther west, that shadow travels with every wagon wheel. The prairie does something strange to your sense of scale. At first it feels beautiful, then enormous. then slightly unsettling, then deeply unsettling. You stand in the middle of grassland so vast that the horizon seems to bend into the sky. Wind moves through tall grass in rolling waves like water without sound. There are no fences, few trees, almost no landmarks, just distance. Distance everywhere. By the late 1830s and early 1840s, wagon travel across the Great Plains becomes a defining experience of pioneer migration. Trails such as the Oregon Trail begin carrying increasing numbers of settlers toward the far west. And prairie life quickly teaches an uncomfortable truth. Boredom can be as exhausting as danger. That surprises people. Popular memory focuses on disasters, attacks, and dramatic crossings, yet most trail days are repetitive. Slow, dusty, quiet. You wake, pack, walk, eat, walk, repair, eat, sleep. Repeat tomorrow. And again. Routine becomes survival. Historians at University of California note that trail migration depended heavily on disciplined daily routine. Successful wagon trains often prioritized order pacing and predictable labor over speed or heroic risk. In other words, drama is overrated. Consistency wins. Morning begins early. Very early. Before sunrise, camp stirs with tired movement. Ash from last night's fire still glows faintly. Coffee heats in blackened pots. Oxen snort clouds of warm breath into cold dawn air. Leather straps stiff from night chill must be fastened again. Hands ache. Feet ache. Everything aches. Breakfast is practical. Biscuit, bacon, beans, coffee. Maybe dried fruit if supplies allow. Nobody complains much because energy matters more than variety. Though yes, everyone secretly misses real bread. And butter. Especially butter. Then wagons roll. The sound becomes familiar. Wooden wheels grinding earth, harness chains clinking, ox hooves pressing deep into dirt. Children walking beside wagons kick dust with small tired boots. Dust becomes constant. Fine dust enters noses, sleeves, hair, blankets, food and lungs. By afternoon, skin feels coated in grit. Teeth grind against invisible particles during meals. Crunch. Every pioneer knows that sound. The prairie also changes weather without warning. Morning may feel gentle. Afternoon may bring punishing heat. Evening winds can turn sharp and cold. You stop trusting comfort. Comfort feels temporary. Research from Harvard University suggests that environmental exposure shaped emigrant psychology as much as physical endurance. Long journeys across open plains altered how travelers understood vulnerability scale and dependence on group cooperation. That makes sense. The prairie humbles ego. There is nowhere to hide from sky. Your mind drifts inside a moving wagon train. Social roles emerge quickly. Leaders help decide pace and camp placement. Skilled repairmen become valuable. Hunters supplement food. Cooks manage limited ingredients. Everyone contributes somehow. Even children work. A young boy gathers buffalo chips for fuel, not glamorous but extremely useful. With few trees available, dried buffalo dung becomes essential for fires. Yes, history is glamorous until someone cooks dinner with dried dung. Then reality returns. Children adapt surprisingly fast. They invent games, count birds, chase grasshoppers, collect unusual stones. They ask endless questions adults cannot answer. How much farther? A dangerous question. Never ask that on a trail. Adults struggle more with monotony. Walking 10 to 15 miles daily creates a strange mental rhythm. Thoughts drift. Memories return. Worries repeat. Some travelers become quiet. Others grow irritable. Small annoyances expand. A squeaky wheel can feel personal. One intimate detail from pioneer diaries appears often. Laundry becomes a surprisingly emotional subject. Clean clothing becomes rare luxury. River crossings offer washing opportunities, but drying takes time and weather cooperation. Fresh clothes lift morale more than expected, because feeling clean briefly restores dignity. Historians still debate mortality estimates on major emigrant trails, because records vary and many deaths went poorly documented. Scholars at Princeton University suggest disease caused far more deaths than dramatic accidents or violence. That fact surprises many people. Not arrows, not gunfights. Disease, cholera becomes especially feared. It spreads fast, dehydrates brutally, and can kill within hours. Poor sanitation around crowded wagon routes increases risk dramatically. The terror lies in speed. Someone walks beside you at breakfast. Gone by nightfall. That reality chills every camp. Burials happen quickly. Graves are often shallow by necessity. Wagon trains cannot stop long. Sometimes graves are placed in roadways to discourage animal disturbance with wagons rolling over fresh soil. The image stays with you. Harsh, quiet, unforgettable. Yet daily life continues because it must. Pioneer travel contains an odd emotional duality. Grief and routine coexist. Mourning happens while wagons still move. Life demands motion. The prairie offers moments of wonder too. Massive buffalo herds thunder across grasslands like moving storms. Antelopes sprint impossibly fast. Evening skies burn orange, pink and deep violet beyond anything eastern forests prepare you for. For a moment it feels as though the sky itself has become larger. Maybe it has, or maybe you're smaller now. Camp evenings become emotional anchors. Wagons circle or align, fires burn low, dinner simmers. Tired bodies finally rest. Muscles loosen around warmth. This matters. Human beings need endings to days. Without camp, the journey feels endless. Music sometimes returns. A fiddle emerges. Hymns are sung softly. Someone tells exaggerated stories about home or future farms waiting in Oregon. Optimism survives through imagination. That is no small thing. You also notice changing trail etiquette. Wagons often travel close enough for cooperation but far enough to avoid constant conflict. Too much closeness breeds arguments. Too much distance breeds danger. Balance matters. Shared hardship creates community but not instant friendship. People still argue over grazing space, leadership decisions, water use and pace. Because pioneers remain people, tired people, hungry people, very opinionated people. Water crossings become major events. Rivers interrupt routine with risk. Shallow crossings require careful guidance. Deeper rivers may need ferries, rafts or floating wagons. Every crossing raises tension. One slip, one panic. Everything changes. The prairie teaches patience through repetition. Not every lesson is dramatic. Some are almost philosophical. Move steadily. Repair early. Protect supplies. Respect weather. Stay with the group. Do not waste water. And perhaps most important, keep going. That phrase becomes sacred on the trail. Not because progress feels fast. Because it usually feels slow. Painfully slow. Yet miles accumulate. Wheel ruts deepen. Familiar landmarks emerge. The chimney rock appears in the distance, rising like a stone signal from the plains. Travellers celebrate because visible progress matters psychologically. Landmarks become morale. Proof that movement is real. You stand at sunset beside a wagon train camp. Wind softens, grass whispers under fading light. Oxen graze. A child sleeps against folded blankets. A woman stirs soup in weary silence. A man rubs blistered feet and stares west. Tomorrow will look much like today. That thought could feel depressing. Strangely, it does not, because routine has become purpose. And beyond this endless sea of grass lies something powerful enough to keep thousands walking. Hope. Still fragile. Still stubborn. Still moving west. The bread burns slightly on one side. Not badly. Just enough to smell it. A woman lifts the iron pan from hot coals and scrapes away the darkest edge with a knife that has already done 10 other jobs today. No one complains. Burned bread still counts as bread. On the frontier, standards adjust quickly. Very quickly. You begin to notice something curious in nearly every pioneer story. Men often dominate the paintings. Men hold axes, rifles reins, and survey maps. Men appear in heroic poses against vast landscapes. But daily survival tells a different story. The frontier often stands because women keep it standing, quietly, relentlessly. By the 1830s and 1840s, as settlements spread westward, women shoulder a workload so constant that modern descriptions can sound almost unbelievable. Domestic labour alone consumes enormous energy. Add frontier hardship, childbirth, isolation and agricultural support and the burden becomes staggering. There are no weekends, no breaks, no convenient delivery services, no pause button. Historians at Yale University note that frontier women performed labour essential to both household survival and frontier economic stability. Yet their work was frequently undervalued in official records dominated by male voices. That understatement almost feels polite. Undervalued is putting it gently. Your mind drifts into a cabin before sunrise somewhere in Illinois or the frontier edge of Iowa. The room is cold, embers barely glow, everyone else still sleeps. She wakes first. Usually. Always too early. She rebuilds the fire with stiff fingers. Wood smoke fills the cabin as flame catches. Water is fetched if none remains. Grain is ground. Breakfast begins. Dough is needed. Coffee boils if available. Morning labour starts before daylight, and rarely slows. A single day includes cooking, washing, mending, cleaning, hauling water, preserving food, tending children, managing gardens, assisting livestock care, treating illness, and often helping with planting or harvest. That list is incomplete. It still sounds exhausting. One intimate detail from pioneer letters appears repeatedly. Laundry was physically punishing. Clothes were scrubbed by hand, wrung, manually boiled when needed, then hung to dry in uncertain weather. Wet wool weighs a shocking amount. Anyone who has handled soaked blankets knows. It feels personal. Research from University of Chicago suggests domestic labour on the frontier consumed far more time and calories than most modern households can easily imagine. Tasks requiring machines today demanded repetitive manual effort. Simple tasks were not simple. Nothing was simple. Food preservation becomes one of the most critical responsibilities. A failed harvest hurts. A poorly preserved harvest can kill. Meat is salted or smoked. Vegetables are dried or root stored. Fruit becomes jam or preserves when sugar is available. Winter planning happens constantly, even in summer. Especially in summer, because cold remembers. Women also manage household medicine. Herbal remedies, poultices, teas, and improvised treatments become frontline healthcare. Fever, cough cuts, burns, infections, childbirth complications, and malnutrition all pass through domestic care first. Sometimes only domestic care. No doctor nearby. That sentence changes everything. A child develops fever at midnight. A husband slices his hand with an axe. A baby struggles to breathe. Help may be miles away if help exists at all. Fear becomes intimate, quiet, private. You see it in small gestures. A mother touching a hot forehead, counting breaths, listening to coughs in darkness, waiting for morning. Those moments rarely appear in heroic frontier myths, yet they define survival. Childbirth on the frontier deserves special attention. It is both ordinary and dangerous. Midwives help when available. Neighbour women often gather for support. But distance can leave women isolated during labour. That risk never fully leaves the mind. Historians still debate how frontier conditions shaped women's social power within households. Scholars at Stanford University argue that while legal systems remained strongly patriarchal, practical frontier life often expanded women's informal authority because competence became essential. Competence earns influence, even where law does not. A woman who manages food, health supplies, and children becomes central to household decision-making. Not always publicly, often undeniably. That distinction matters. Frontier women also fight loneliness. This burden's easy to underestimate. Isolation weighs heavily, especially after leaving extended family networks. Mothers, sisters, friends, church communities, and familiar neighbours may now live hundreds of miles away. Let us help. Slowly, Painfully slowly, a letter from home can take weeks or months. Paper becomes emotional treasure. Some women reread letters until folds weaken and corners tear. Words become company. For a moment it feels as though loneliness becomes a second climate on the frontier. Invisible, persistent, cold in its own way. One intimate human detail survives in many diaries. Some women marked days by baking routines, garden growth, or children's height, because ordinary measurements of time blurred in isolated life. That detail feels haunting. You need anchors. Humans always do. Yet frontier women are not merely enduring suffering. They build culture. They preserve memory. They create emotional continuity inside unstable environments. They teach children songs. They pass down recipes. They keep family rituals alive. That work is invisible and powerful. Religion often provides structure. Prayer, scripture reading, hymn singing, and church gatherings offer emotional grounding. Faith gives meaning to uncertainty and language for fear. Not everyone is deeply religious. Many are. Hope needs somewhere to live. You also notice humour surviving in unexpected places. Frontier letters sometimes include dry wit about mud, stubborn husbands, noisy children, or failed recipes. That matters. Humour is resilience. Gentle sarcasm may not plough fields, but it keeps spirits alive. And yes, frontier women absolutely judge terrible cooking. As they should. Community between women becomes essential. Visits between neighbouring households provide relief far beyond conversation. Shared childcare, midwifery, food exchange, sewing circles, and emotional support strengthen settlements. Civilization often arrives through relationships before infrastructure, before schools, before roads, before stores, through people. By the 1840s, growing settlements slowly reduce some burdens. Mills save grain labour, stores increase access to goods. Larger communities offer more support networks. But hardship remains, especially during migration. Wagon travel places even heavier burdens on women. Cooking on the trail, caring for sick children, managing supplies, maintaining morale, sometimes walking hundreds of miles while pregnant. Pause on that. Hundreds of miles. Pregnant. History deserves honesty. That is astonishing. You return to evening inside a cabin. Fire crackles. The air smells of soup smoke and damp wool drying by flame. Children finally sleep after long complaints about chores and boredom. At last stillness. A woman sits by candlelight mending torn clothing. Her hands move automatically. Needle in, needle out, thread pulled tight. Exhaustion settles deep. But so does something else. Pride. Quiet pride. The roof holds. The children ate. The winter stores are growing. The garden survived frost. Another day passed. No applause follows. No statue is built. Yet the frontier endures because of such evenings. Because someone kept the fire going. And because someone remembered the salt. Because someone noticed the fever early. Because someone held the household together when everything outside remained uncertain. The pioneer story loves wagons and rifles. It should also remember hands like these. Tired hands. Capable hands. Hands that built the West without demanding recognition. Childhood on the frontier ends quietly. No ceremony marks it. No bell rings. No official voice announces that innocence is over. It simply happens. One morning a child wakes up and is expected to do real work. Not pretend work. Not chores designed to keep little hands busy. Necessary work. Work that matters to the survival of the household. And from that day forward, life feels different. You notice this almost immediately in pioneer communities of the 1830s and 1840s. Children are everywhere, but they are rarely idle for long. They carry water, gather firewood, mind livestock, weed gardens, churn butter patch fences, watch younger siblings and run messages between scattered households. Small bodies, serious responsibilities. Historians at Harvard University note that frontier childhood blended labor education and family survival in ways that sharply differed from later modern ideals of childhood as a protected stage of life. That difference is profound. A 7-year-old today may struggle to find matching socks. A 7-year-old on the frontier might help keep the household alive. Your mind drifts to a cabin before sunrise. Frost clings to the window edge. Firelight flickers against log walls. A boy pulls on stiff boots, rubbing sleep from tired eyes. He does not want to go outside. Too bad. The chickens still need feeding. The cow still needs milking. Cold does not negotiate. Children learn quickly that nature does not care about mood. Rain falls whether you feel motivated or not. Snow buries paths whether you slept well or not. Animals demand care on schedule. Responsibility becomes rhythm, not choice. One intimate detail appears often in frontier diaries. Children frequently inherited clothing from older siblings patched repeatedly until fabric nearly gave up on existence. Elbows wore thin, knees tore constantly. Socks disappeared into history. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Research from University of California suggests that material scarcity shaped frontier childhood deeply. Toys, books, and luxury items were limited, encouraging improvisation and practical creativity, which sounds noble, and sometimes was. But scarcity is still scarcity. Children invent games from whatever exists. Sticks become swords, stones become game pieces, corn husks become dolls, rope becomes entertainment, snow becomes an entire universe of temporary joy. Play survives. Children make sure of that. That resilience feels almost miraculous. For a moment it feels as though childhood refuses to disappear entirely no matter how hard the frontier tries. A boy racing barefoot through summer grass is still a boy. A girl laughing during a snowball fight is still a girl. Joy persists, stubbornly. Education remains inconsistent. Some settlements establish schools once population allows. These early schools are often one-room buildings serving multiple ages under one teacher. Resources are limited, very limited. Books are scarce. Paper is precious. Ink costs money. Attendance depends heavily on season and labour needs. Harvest season often wins. Always, if the farm needs hand school waits. Historians at Columbia University observe that frontier education often reflected a constant tension between long-term aspiration and immediate survival. Families valued literacy, but daily necessity frequently overruled formal schooling. That tension feels deeply human. You care about the future, but today still demands food. Children also learn through observation. Fathers teach tool use tracking, hunting, ploughing, and animal care. Mothers teach cooking, sewing, preserving food, household management, medicine, and caregiving. Knowledge moves through hands, not just words. Watch once, try once, learn fast, because mistakes cost more here. A child who leaves a gate open may lose livestock. A child careless with fire may endanger the cabin. A child wasting food learns quickly why waste matters. Consequences educate harshly, yet not all hardship comes from labour. Illness shadows childhood constantly. Fever, measles, influenza, dysentery, and cholera threaten families with terrifying speed. This is the cruelest part. Parents know children may not survive to adulthood. They love anyway, perhaps more fiercely because of uncertainty. One intimate human detail from surviving letters feels almost unbearable. Parents sometimes avoided giving away a dead child's belongings for months, unable to move small shoes or toys from familiar places. Grief leaves objects glowing with memory. A wooden doll, a tiny blanket, a worn cap, suddenly unbearable. Historians still debate whether frontier hardship accelerated emotional maturity or simply forced children into adult roles before emotional development could naturally occur. Scholars at Princeton University suggest both patterns existed, varying by family structure and community support. That feels right. Children adapt, but adaptation has costs. Loneliness affects frontier children too. Neighbouring children may live miles away. Friendships require distance and planning. Social circles remain small unless settlements grow. This shapes personality. Some children become deeply independent, comfortable with solitude, skilled at entertaining themselves. Others feel acute isolation, especially during long winters. Winter magnifies everything. Silence grows heavier. Snow traps movement. Cabins shrink psychologically. Cabin fever's real. Very real. A child stuck indoors for days with siblings in close quarters learns negotiation, creativity, and conflict with impressive speed. Or starts fights. Sometimes both. You also notice how migration itself affects children. Wagon journeys exhaust them physically and emotionally. They miss familiar landscapes, relatives, and routines, even when adults remain focused on destination. Children ask questions adults struggle to answer. When will we get there? Will we have friends? Will grandma visit? Can we go home? That last question can break hearts. Because sometimes the honest answer is no. Never. And parents know it. Yet frontier childhood also creates remarkable capability. Teenagers often perform labour that would impress hardened adults. A 13-year-old may drive wagons, hunt game, deliver messages through dangerous terrain, or manage livestock independently. Competence arrives early. Confidence sometimes follows. By adolescence, many frontier youths stand on the edge of adult life faster than modern expectations would allow. Marriage can come young. Work certainly does. Responsibility expands before emotional readiness fully catches up. Still, community rituals help mark belonging. Church gatherings, harvest celebrations, seasonal dances, and barn raisings allow young people to form identity beyond family labour. Music matters here. So does storytelling. Children absorb family legends, migration tales, survival stories, and frontier warnings. Narrative becomes inheritance. Remember the river crossing. Remember the winter storm. Remember the wolves. Remember who we are. Stories build identity. You return to evening inside a frontier home. Candlelight flickers low. Outside, wind brushes against rough cabin walls. Inside, children lie under quilts stitched from scraps of old fabric. A mother reads slowly from a worn book. A father sharpens tools for tomorrow. One child is already asleep. Another fights it. Barely. Exhaustion wins. It usually does. Tomorrow will bring chores again. Water to carry, animals to feed, wood to split, lessons to learn. Childhood continues. But frontier childhood never floats free from reality for long. It grows beside labour, beside loss, beside responsibility. And in doing so, children become something the frontier demands. Older than their years, stronger than expected, still children. But changing fast, something strange happens in the early 1840s. The trickle becomes a flood. What was once a difficult, uncertain migration now turns into something close to a national obsession. Newspapers talk about it. Letters celebrate it. Land promoters advertise it. Church groups discuss it. Tavern conversations circle back to it again and again. Oregon, just that word can change a room. You feel it in crowded general stores across Missouri and Illinois. Men studying maps lean closer. Women exchange letters from relatives already gone west. Young couples calculate impossible possibilities. Could we do it? Should we do it? The question grows louder. By the mid-1840s, the Oregon Trail becomes the most famous migration corridor in the United States. Stretching roughly 2,000 miles from the Missouri River to the Pacific Northwest, the trail promises fertile land, milder climate, and opportunity for families seeking reinvention. Promise does heavy lifting. Reality remains harder, but promise sells. Historians at Stanford University note that Oregon migration was fueled by a combination of economic pressure, population growth, aggressive promotional literature, and rising cultural belief in continental expansion. That last part matters a lot. The frontier is no longer seen merely as optional opportunity. Increasingly, many Americans begin viewing westward movement as part of national destiny. The phrase manifest destiny emerges during this period, expressing the belief that the United States is meant to expand across the continent. Powerful idea, dangerous idea, because destiny can make conquest sound noble. Still, most pioneer families are not speaking in ideological language over dinner. They speak in practical terms. Land prices, crop failures, debt, inheritance. A second son with no farmland to inherit sees Oregon differently than a politician writing editorials. To him, Oregon means ownership, perhaps survival. Your mind drifts into a farm kitchen during spring 1843. Rain taps softly against the roof. A father studies newspaper advertisement praising Oregon's fertile valleys. The language feels almost magical. Rich soil, healthy climate, abundant timber, good grazing, no mention of blistered feet. Convenient omission. The year 1843 becomes legendary as the Great Migration. Around 1,000 emigrants join large wagon trains heading west, a scale that astonishes observers. 1,000 people. That number matters psychologically. Going alone feels reckless. Going with hundreds feels possible. Safety in numbers creates momentum. Research from University of Chicago suggests large wagon companies improve survival by pooling labour tools, livestock management and decision-making during difficult trail conditions. Community lowers risk. Usually, though community also increases arguments. That part is free. Preparation for Oregon becomes obsessive. Families sell farms, auction furniture, buy wagons, gather tools, and calculate food requirements with serious care. Or at least they try. Experienced guides warn against overpacking, bring essentials, leave vanity behind, carry flour, bacon beans, dried fruit, coffee, medicine, spare parts, tools, ammunition seed, and travel light. That advice is rarely followed perfectly. Sentiment weighs more than logic. One intimate detail from emigrant journals appears again and again. Families struggled most with deciding what to leave behind. Objects became emotional battlegrounds. A rocking chair, wedding china, books, family Bible, children's toys. What deserves wagon space? The question hurts because objects carry memory. Leaving something behind can feel like abandoning part of yourself. Historians still debate how accurate Oregon promotional claims were. Scholars at Harvard University argue that while the Willamette Valley truly offered fertile farmland, boosters often minimized travel risk and exaggerated ease of settlement. Again, marketing. Humanity remains consistent. Excitement grows strongest each spring. Timing is critical. Depart too late and snow in the mountains becomes deadly. Leave too early and prairie grass may not yet support livestock. Calendar becomes strategy, not suggestion. By April and May, departure towns become chaotic. Blacksmith shops overflow, wagon wheels are repaired non-stop, oxen prices rise, ferries stay busy, camps crowd riverbanks. Energy fills the air. Nervous energy, hope mixed with fear. You smell fresh-cut timber, horse-sweat flower dust and campfire smoke drifting across crowded staging grounds. Babies cry, dogs bark, men argue over supplies. Children stare at endless rows of wagons. This is no small migration. It feels like a moving civilization. And then the road begins. Wagons roll west from jumping-off points such as Independence and nearby settlements. Trails widen under repeated passage. Grass flattens beneath wheels and hooves. The nation is moving, literally. One fascinating social detail emerges on the Oregon Trail. Many emigrants form temporary governments within wagon trains. Rules are established, leaders selected, disputes mediated, shared responsibilities assigned. Order matters. Without rules, chaos spreads fast. Disagreements over grazing pacewater access or discipline can fracture morale. Strong leadership helps, though not always. Sometimes elected leaders discover a timeless truth. Managing tired people is hard. Managing hungry, tired people is worse. The trail itself becomes a test of emotional endurance. Not everyone maintains optimism. Some regret leaving within weeks. Homesickness hits hard, especially among women and older travellers. The Eastern world begins to feel distant, then unreal. Letters cannot easily bridge such distance. Your old life starts fading. That psychological transition matters more than maps reveal. Migration is not only physical movement, it is identity change. You stop being someone from somewhere and become something new. An emigrant, a pioneer, someone in between worlds. For a moment it feels as though the trail strips away social certainty. Wealth matters less when everyone walks through mud. Status matters less when cholera spreads. Fancy manners matter less when oxen refuse cooperation. Nature equalizes ruthlessly, yet hope survives because Oregon remains ahead. Travelers imagine orchards, fertile valleys, and permanent homes waiting beyond mountains. That future pulls them forward. Always forward. Children dream of rivers and forests. Parents dream of land deeds and stable harvests. Teenagers dream of independence, adventure, and perhaps meeting someone interesting at the next camp. Romance survives surprisingly well in difficult conditions. Humans are efficient that way. By the late 1840s, Oregon fever has reshaped American migration patterns. Westward movement is no longer fringe behavior. It is mainstream aspiration. The pioneer dream has matured. Bigger, faster, more organized, and more dangerous. Because enthusiasm now outruns caution. Soon the easy part ends. The prairie will give way to harsher tests. Mountains rise ahead. Deserts wait beyond. Rivers become deadlier. Supplies grow thinner. Dreams will meet reality. Brutally. But tonight, campfires burn across the Missouri frontier as thousands prepare for departure. Canvas glows orange in firelight. Voices murmur under vast stars. Somewhere a fiddle plays. Tomorrow they leave, and many lives will never be the same. The mountains do not arrive gradually. They appear. At first they seem like pale shapes on the horizon, almost unreal in the distance, like clouds that forgot how to move. But day after day those shapes grow darker, sharper, and far more intimidating. Then the truth settles in. You must cross them. Every wagon, every ox, every child, every sack of flour, every fragile dream, all of it. The easy miles are over. By the mid-1840s, emigrants on the Oregon Trail have usually survived months of prairie travel before reaching the Great Western Barriers. The vast plains are exhausting, but the mountains and deserts become something else entirely. They become judgment. Nature asks a brutal question. Did you prepare well enough? Many did not. You feel the change immediately as terrain begins rising. Flat horizons vanish, trails narrow, wheels strike rock instead of packed earth. Streams cut through steep valleys, animals breathe harder on inclines. Everything slows, painfully. A wagon that moves steadily across prairie now struggles up grades that seem designed to insult optimism. Oxen strain until muscles tremble, ropes tighten, wheels slip. Men push from behind with burning legs and shaking shoulders. Progress becomes measured in yards, not miles. Historians at Princeton University note that mountain crossings represented the greatest logistical challenge for overland emigrants because elevation, weather-limited forage, and difficult terrain amplified every earlier mistake. That sounds academic. In practice, it means this. If you pack too much, you suffer. If you brought weak animals, you suffer. If you left late, you suffer. Mostly you suffer. One intimate detail from trail journals appears constantly during mountain crossings. Families abandon possessions in shocking quantities. Heavy trunks, furniture, stoves, books, even heirlooms. The trail becomes a graveyard of attachment. Need sharpens priorities. Mercilessly. A woman may stand over a cherished chair brought from home knowing it cannot continue. That chair survived weddings, births, and winters. It carries memory. Now it stays behind. That hurts more than outsiders understand. Because abandoning objects often feels like shedding identity, yet survival demands it. For a moment it feels as though the mountain strips everyone to essentials. Food, water, warmth, motion. Nothing decorative matters now. The air changes with elevation. It grows cooler, thinner, cleaner. Pine scent replaces prairie dust. Wind cuts sharper through clothing. Nights become cold enough that frost appears even when days remain warm. Cold returns. It always returns. Research from University of California suggests that late-season mountain travel posed extreme risk because early snowfall could trap wagon trains in passes with limited escape routes. Every pioneer hears warnings. Leave early. Cross before snow. Do not delay. Some still delay. Human optimism is powerful. Weather is stronger. The Rocky Mountains test both body and morale, but farther west another enemy waits. Desert. That surprises many emigrants. They imagine forests and fertile valleys. Instead, they encounter stretches of dry, punishing terrain where water becomes obsession. Nothing matters more. Nothing. Your lips crack, tongue dries, skin feels tight under relentless sun. Dust rises in hot waves from the ground. Animals weaken, tempers shorten. Heat changes personalities. Kind people become irritable. Patient people snap. Exhaustion speaks loudly. The most feared sections include long arid stretches such as the Snake River Plain and later desert crossings toward California. Water sources become critical strategic targets. Miss one spring and consequences escalate fast. Very fast. Historians at Stanford University emphasize that dehydration and animal exhaustion often shape trail mortality more than dramatic accidents. Again, the frontier resists heroic storytelling, not dramatic battles. Thirst. Simple, relentless thirst. One intimate human detail from emigrant diaries stays with you. Water quality often mattered less than water existence. Muddy water, warm water, bitter mineral water. If it was wet, people drank. No luxury, just necessity. Children suffer especially in harsh conditions. They tire faster, dehydrate faster, complain more honestly than adults. Which is understandable. Adults perform bravery. Children report reality. I am thirsty. My feet hurt. I am tired. Those simple truths cut through false optimism. You also begin to notice death becoming less abstract. Along difficult crossings, graves appear beside the trail, sometimes marked, often not. Wooden markers weather quickly, names fade. The road remembers, even when markers do not. Historians still debate precise emigrant mortality totals because records remain incomplete, and many burials went undocumented. Scholars at Columbia University estimate thousands died on major western trails from disease exposure, accidents, and exhaustion. Thousands. Pause on that. Each number was a person. A parent, a child, a friend, someone with plans. And still the wagons continue. That fact feels almost impossible. Why keep going after seeing graves? Because turning back remains equally terrifying. Distance works on the mind. Once deep enough into the journey, home feels unreachable. Forward becomes the only direction that makes emotional sense. We have come too far. That phrase returns. Again and again, river crossings in mountain country bring fresh danger. Swift currents push hard against wagon wheels. Loose rocks destabilize footing. Cold water numbs legs almost instantly. One bad step. One panic. Disaster. Animals spook easily. Oxen can pull miracles under pressure, but fear spreads quickly through herds. A frightened animal can overturn wagons, destroy supplies, or injure people. Pioneers learn to respect animals differently on the trail, not as property alone, as partners in survival. That changes perspective. Then comes the emotional breaking point many pioneers describe. Exhaustion without novelty. The mountains are beautiful. Eventually beauty becomes background. Pain remains foreground. Shoulders ache daily, feet blister, sleep feels shallow, food grows repetitive, morale fluctuates wildly. Yet strange resilience appears. Humans adapt to hardship with unsettling efficiency. Yesterday's misery becomes today's normal. That realization feels both impressive and sad. For a moment it feels as though the trail is forging new people from old ones, stripping softness, revealing endurance. Some travelers emerge stronger, some harder, sometimes both. And then, after months of strain, signs of descent appear. Rivers shift direction, valleys widen, air softens slightly, timber thickens, grass improves. The landscape begins whispering something precious. Almost there. Almost. Those two words can revive entire wagon trains. Children regain energy. Adults stand straighter. Hope returns with a dangerous force. Because expectations rise near the end, people begin imagining arrival in vivid detail. Permanent homes, fenced land, warm meals, safe sleep without nightly uncertainty. Relief feels close enough to touch. Not yet, but close. Tonight you sit beside a mountain campfire. Pine smoke rises into dark cold air. Boots steam gently as wet socks dry by flame. Someone stirs thin soup in iron cookware. No one speaks much. They are beyond conversation. Only fatigue remains. Above them, stars burn with indifferent clarity. Below them, the trail continues west. Behind them lies everything familiar. Ahead lies the life they sacrificed everything to reach. The mountains have tested them. The desert has stripped them. And still they move. Slowly, stubbornly. West, it begins with a rumour. Not a quiet rumour, a loud one. The kind that races faster than horses, faster than newspapers, faster than reason. It passes through ports, taverns, churches, general stores, river docks, and mining camps with astonishing speed. Gold. That single word can rearrange human behaviour almost instantly. In January 1848 at Sutter's Mill in California, a carpenter named James W. Marshall notices shining flakes in a mill race. He suspects what they might be. Soon the suspicion becomes fact. Gold has been found, and nothing remains calm. The California gold rush explodes into one of the most transformative migrations in American history. By 1849, fortune seekers flood westward in such numbers that they become famously known as the 49ers. The name sounds almost cheerful. Reality is not. You can feel the electricity of the moment. Newspapers publish sensational reports. Letters from California circulate wildly. Stories grow larger with every retelling. Men finding nuggets in streams. Ordinary labourers becoming rich overnight. Gold lying practically on the ground. That last part is especially dangerous. Because it sounds easy. Historians at Harvard University note that gold rushes trigger powerful speculative psychology, where rare success stories overshadow overwhelming evidence of failure. Human brains love jackpots. They ignore probability. Quite enthusiastically, your mind drifts to a crowded dock in New York City. Sailors shout. Crates slam against wood. Men clutch bedrolls, tools, pans, picks, and impossible dreams. Some leave jobs, some abandon farms, some desert ships, some walk away from families promising quick riches. Quick becomes relative. The journey to California itself remains brutal. Prospectors travel overland through familiar wagon routes, sail around Cape Horn, or cross the fever-ridden isthmus of Panama. None are comfortable. All are risky. Yet people keep coming from everywhere. That is what makes the gold rush extraordinary. It is not merely an American migration. It becomes global. People arrive from China, Mexico, Chile, France, Germany, and beyond. California becomes chaotic international theatre. Accents collide. Languages mix. Fortunes rise and vanish. Research from Stanford University shows California's non-native population exploded from roughly 14,000 in 1848 to over 200,000 within a few years. That pace is absurd. Cities struggle to cope. Supply systems collapse under demand. Prices become ridiculous. A single egg may cost what feels outrageous. A shovel costs more than dignity, sometimes more than common sense. For a moment it feels as though normal economic rules simply stop functioning. Scarcity rewrites value. You arrive at a mining camp in the Sierra foothills. The sensory overload is immediate. Mud everywhere. Wood smoke drifting between tents, sweat tobacco whiskey and unwashed wool create a smell that no luxury candle company will ever reproduce. Thankfully, men crowd streams with pans, picks and shovels. Water flashes in sunlight. Gravel is sifted with obsessive focus. Pan, shake, wash, look, nothing. Repeat. Again, again, again. This becomes daily life for countless miners. Most do not become rich. That is the crucial truth. Very few strike major fortune. Many barely survive. Historians at University of Chicago estimate that the majority of independent miners earned modest returns at best, especially after early easily accessible deposits disappeared. In other words, the real gold often flowed elsewhere. To merchants, to suppliers, to transport networks, to bankers. There is a timeless lesson there. during gold rushes selling shovels can beat digging. One intimate human detail from miner diaries appears constantly. Clothing deteriorated rapidly, boots split, socks rotted, hands cracked from cold water and constant abrasion. Fingernails broke, skin bled. Gold hunting is rough on the body. Romantic paintings omit that. Mining camps also become socially volatile. Wealth inequality appears instantly. One miner finds a rich deposit, his neighbour finds nothing for weeks. Luck creates emotional whiplash. Envy grows fast. So does greed. Gambling thrives because people already live in a psychological lottery. Why not continue at night? Card tables fill. So do saloons. Whiskey helps many forget how little gold they found that day. Sometimes too much whiskey. Law enforcement struggles to keep pace. Camps spring up faster than governance. Claims are disputed, theft occurs, violence erupts, vigilante justice sometimes fills legal gaps. Order remains fragile. Very fragile. Historians still debate how much frontier lawlessness during the gold rush has been exaggerated by later myth-making. Scholars at Yale University suggest popular memory often magnifies violence, while underestimating the speed with which communities built institutions. That nuance matters. Chaos existed. So did organization. Schools appear. Churches appear. Businesses multiply. Civilization follows money with impressive speed. Yet the gold rush also carries devastating consequences for native communities in California. Mining destroys ecosystems, contaminates waterways, and accelerates violent displacement. Settler expansion intensifies dramatically. This truth cannot be softened. Native populations suffer catastrophic violence, disease, starvation, and dispossession during this period. Opportunity for some becomes catastrophe for others. Again, the pioneer story carries dual truths. Prosperity and loss. Progress and destruction. Both. Women, though fewer in number during early rush years, also reshape California's economy. Some run boarding houses, laundries, bakeries, hotels, and stores. In many cases, reliable service businesses prove more profitable than mining itself. Practicality wins, often. One intimate detail from camp accounts feels strangely human. Fresh bread becomes legendary. A miner eating warm bread after weeks of beans and salted meat may react with near-religious gratitude. Understandable. Civilized food restores hope. By 1850, California enters the Union as a state. That speed reflects astonishing transformation. Barely 2 years after discovery, the region has changed beyond recognition. Towns explode, ports swell, roads expand, capital flows, and the American West feels permanently altered. The gold rush accelerates migration infrastructure finance and Western political importance. It also intensifies the belief that immense fortune may lie just beyond the horizon. That belief becomes addictive, dangerously addictive. Tonight you stand beside a mining creek at dusk. The water runs cold around exhausted boots. Nearby, a miner makes one final pass with his pan before dark. Pan, shake. Wash, wait. Hope lives in that pause. Perhaps this time. Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps just one good strike. Behind him lie months of sacrifice. Ahead lies uncertainty. And still he bends toward the water, searching, like so many pioneers before him, for land, for freedom, for reinvention, for fortune, for proof that the long journey west meant something. The gold glitters in imagination long before it appears in hand. Sometimes it never appears at all. Still the dream keeps drawing people forward, westward. Always westward. A town appears where nothing stood weeks earlier. Not a village slowly growing over decades. Not a careful settlement planned with patience. A town, almost overnight. Yesterday there was mud brush and few tents. Today there are saloons, supply stores, gambling halls, blacksmiths, boarding houses, stables, butcher stalls, and enough shouting to wake mountains. Welcome to the boomtown. The boomtown is one of the strangest creations of the American frontier. It rises with breathtaking speed, fueled by discovery speculation and the universal human fear of missing out. Yes, that feeling is not modern. The 19th century understood it very well. Following the California gold rush and other mineral discoveries across the West, boom towns begin appearing across mining regions with astonishing regularity. Some survive, many vanish. Nearly all live intensely. Fast money creates fast infrastructure and fast chaos. You arrive at a new mining settlement in the foothills of Sierra Nevada. The ground is churned into thick mud by boots wagons, horses, and constant construction. Fresh-cut lumber fills the air with sharp resin scent. Hammering echoes from every direction. Bang, bang, bang. It never fully stops. Buildings go up quickly because time equals money. Canvas tents become wood shacks. Shacks become storefronts. Dirt streets form without permission. Signs appear painted in bold letters. Hot meals, tools, rooms, whiskey, sometimes in that exact order. Historians at Stanford University note that boomtown growth often followed highly compressed economic cycles where population surges outpace governance, sanitation, housing, and infrastructure. That is academic language for one simple truth. Things get messy, very messy. You smell everything at once. Horse manure, frying meat, wet wood, tobacco smoke, whiskey breath, sweat trapped in wool coats, river mud drying on boots. Civilization smells different when built too quickly. One intimate detail from boomtown records appears repeatedly. Mud became legendary. In rainy seasons, streets could turn into thick sludge, deep enough to trap boots or wagon wheels. Mud again. The frontier truly loves mud. No one asked for this theme. Yet here we are. Population diversity makes boomtowns fascinating. Miners live beside merchants, carpenters, barbers, cooks, gamblers, bankers, entertainers, laundresses, doctors, preachers, and opportunists who somehow profit from all of them. Especially opportunists. They thrive. Research from University of California shows that service industries often generated more stable wealth in boomtowns than direct mining. Businesses supplying food tools, lodging, and transport frequently outperformed prospectors. The shovel lesson returns. Always remember the shovel lesson. A general store owner selling picks, flour, rope, and boots may sleep better than a miner chasing uncertain claims. Not that anyone sleeps especially well here. Boomtown nights are loud. Very loud. Music spills from saloons, fiddles play, piano keys clash under tired fingers. Glass breaks, dice roll, card tables attract hopeful faces under smoky lamplight. Money changes hands constantly. Fast. Too fast. For a moment it feels as though everyone in town is either gaining money, losing money, borrowing money, or lying about money. Often all four. Gambling becomes central to boomtown culture. Why not people already live in a high-risk world? Luck governs mining claims, weather supply costs, and discovery. Cards feel honest by comparison. At least the odds are visible. Mostly, crime rises with population density and weak law enforcement. Theft becomes common. Claim jumping creates intense disputes. Fights break out over money, alcohol, insult, and exhaustion, sometimes over astonishingly trivial things. A rude comment, a disputed poker hand, someone cutting line. Sleep deprivation does not improve diplomacy. Historians still debate how violent boomtowns truly were compared with popular myth. Scholars at Harvard University argue that Hollywood-style lawlessness often exaggerates constant gun violence while underestimating the rapid creation of informal legal systems. That matters, because even chaos seeks order. Human beings organize surprisingly fast when property needs protecting. Mining camps develop claim rules, merchant associations form, vigilance committees appear, sheriffs are appointed or elected. Judges emerge, some qualified, some merely confident. Confidence goes far on the frontier. Sometimes too far. Women remain fewer in number in many early boomtowns, but their presence significantly alters social life and economic structure. Boarding houses, restaurants, laundries, hotels, and family homes begin stabilizing communities. Domestic routine civilizes space, at least partially. A warm meal served consistently can improve an entire town's morale. That sounds dramatic. It is also true. One intimate human detail from boarding house records stands out. Fresh sheets became an enormous luxury. Travellers arriving after months of trail hardship sometimes wrote emotionally about sleeping in a clean bed. Clean linen feels miraculous, especially after canvas and dirt. Immigrant communities also shape boomtown identity. Chinese labourers, Latin American miners, European craftsmen, and many others contribute labour trade and culture to Western settlements. This diversity enriches towns. It also creates tension. Competition for claims and jobs fuels discrimination. Prejudice hardens into exclusionary laws, social hostility, and violence. The frontier offers opportunity. Not equally. That truth matters. You notice another strange psychological feature of boomtown life. Time compresses. A month feels like a year. Fortunes rise and collapse within weeks. Buildings appear so quickly that returning travellers barely recognise towns. Nothing feels stable, yet people keep investing emotionally. They marry, start businesses, have children, build churches, open schools. Hope persists even in temporary places. Research from Yale University suggests settlement permanence often depended less on resource discovery itself, and more on whether infrastructure and family life took root before the resource declined. That makes sense. Gold attracts people. Families anchor them. Without long-term community, many boomtowns fade just as quickly as they appeared. Mines run dry, investors leave, shops close, buildings decay, wind reclaims abandoned streets. Ghost towns are boom towns after the music stops. That thought feels strangely sad. All that noise, all that ambition, then silence. Tonight, however, the boomtown still lives. You walk down a muddy main street under lantern glow. Hammering finally slows. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs too loudly after too much whiskey. A blacksmith works late under sparks. From a saloon, music spills into the cold night. Inside a boarding house, a cook prepares tomorrow's bread. Upstairs, exhausted miners sleep hard beneath rough blankets. A merchant counts coins by candlelight, quietly pleased that he earned more today than most miners did all month. Again, the shovel lesson. Outside town, dark hills still hold hidden ore. Maybe gold. Maybe silver. Maybe nothing. That uncertainty powers everything. Boomtowns exist because hope can build entire communities overnight. And on the frontier, hope remains one of the strongest currencies of all. At first you hear it from far away. A faint vibration. Metal on metal. Rhythmic, relentless, mechanical. Then the sound grows louder. Steel wheels grind against iron rails with a force unlike anything the frontier has known before. Smoke rises in thick dark columns, steam hisses. A whistle cuts across open land sharp enough to stop conversation mid-sentence. The railroad has arrived, and nothing will remain the same. For decades, the American frontier has moved at the speed of muscle. Human muscle, horse muscle, ox muscle. Every wagon, plough, ferry, and stagecoach remains bound to physical endurance and weather. Distance feels heavy because movement is slow. Railroads change that. Suddenly distance begins shrinking. Not physically, psychologically. By the 1850s, and especially after the American Civil War, railroad expansion becomes one of the most transformative forces in the American West. Settlements once isolated by weeks of travel become reachable in days. Days. That word alone changes economies. Historians at University of Chicago note that railroad development radically altered frontier settlement by reducing transport costs, accelerating migration, and integrating remote regions into national markets. That sounds economic. It also feels deeply personal, because speed changes how people imagine life. Your mind drifts to a small western settlement before rail connection. Supplies arrive slowly by wagon. Mail comes irregularly. News from the east feels stale by arrival. Prices remain high because transportation costs dominate everything. Then rails come, and suddenly flour becomes cheaper. Tools arrive faster. Mail becomes regular. Newspapers feel current. Isolation weakens. The frontier feels less alone. Research from Stanford University shows that communities connected to rail lines often grew dramatically faster than settlements bypassed by major routes. Rail access becomes destiny. In many cases, yes. A town with rail may thrive. A town without rail may fade. That seems harsh. The frontier often is. Construction itself is monumental. Building rail across the continent demands enormous labour. Surveyors mark routes through plains, rivers, mountains and deserts. Workers grade earth, blast rock, lay ties, spike rails and build bridges across impossible terrain. The labour is relentless. So is the danger. One intimate detail from construction accounts stands out. Railroad workers handled heavy iron rails under extreme heat, cold wind and fatigue. Hands blistered, backs strained, injuries were common. Steel arrives through human suffering. That truth matters. The workforce becomes extraordinarily diverse. Veterans, immigrants, former miners, freed black labourers, Irish workers and large numbers of Chinese labourers contribute to Western railroad construction. Their labour deserves recognition, especially the Chinese crews. The Central Pacific Railroad relies heavily on Chinese workers to tackle some of the most brutal sections through the Sierra Nevada. They cut tunnels through granite, hang from cliffs in baskets, and work through snow and avalanche risk. Pause there. Hanging from cliffs, in baskets, to blast tunnels. The frontier really does not believe in easy jobs. Historians at Harvard University emphasize that Chinese railroad labor was essential to transcontinental construction. Though for generations their contribution was underrepresented in mainstream historical narratives. That omission matters, because infrastructure remembers labor even when textbooks forget. Then comes the great milestone. In 1869, the Golden Spike ceremony at Promontory Summit symbolically links the eastern and western rail systems. The first transcontinental railroad is complete. A continent changes. Immediately. Before the railroad, travelling from eastern cities to California could take months by wagon or ship. After completion, rail travel compresses that journey to roughly a week. A week? Try to feel that shift. Months become days. That feels almost magical. For a moment it feels as though time itself has been engineered. The economic consequences are enormous. Cattle move faster to market. Crops ship farther. Timber coal machinery and manufactured goods flow across regions with unprecedented speed. Markets unify. Prices shift. Opportunity expands. So does competition. Railroads also reshape pioneer migration. Wagon trails do not vanish overnight, but their dominance fades. Families who once faced months of overland hardship can increasingly travel west with less physical risk. Not comfort exactly, but less suffering. Usually, one intimate human detail from early passenger accounts feels charmingly familiar. Many travellers complained about train food noise and uncomfortable seating. Some traditions survive every century. Rail travel reduces certain hardships while introducing new ones. Smoke fills air near engines. Coal soot settles on clothing. Long rides create stiffness and fatigue. Sleeping arrangements remain uneven. Still far better than walking beside oxen. That comparison wins easily. Historians still debate whether railroads democratized Western opportunity or concentrated power in corporate hands. Scholars at Yale University argue both happened simultaneously. That sounds right. Railroads expand access. They also create powerful monopolies. Rail companies receive vast land grants from the federal government. Millions of acres shift into corporate control. These companies profit not only from transport but land sales. Tracks attract settlers. Settlers raise land value. Land sales fund expansion. The system feeds itself. Yet railroads also carry cultural power beyond economics. They change how Americans think about space. Regions once imagined as distant frontier begin feeling integrated into a single national system. The West feels closer, more knowable, less mysterious. That psychological shift marks the beginning of the frontier's transformation from wilderness myth into structured territory. Not everywhere, but increasingly. You notice subtle social changes in rail towns. Hotels appear near depots, warehouses multiply, telegraph offices cluster around stations, schedules begin mattering more. This last point is surprisingly important. Time itself becomes standardized. Before rail, local time varied by community. Noon meant when the sun stood highest. Rail scheduling makes such flexibility inconvenient. Very inconvenient. Trains prefer precision. Human systems adapt. The railroad teaches punctuality through steel. It also teaches hierarchy. Towns fight fiercely for rail access because everyone understands the stakes. Missing a rail route can economically wound a settlement for generations. Some towns boom, others vanish. Tracks choose winners. Tonight you stand beside a western station under fading light. Steam curls upward into cooling air. Lanterns glow along wooden platforms. Porters move cargo with practiced speed. A child watches wide-eyed as the locomotive exhales like some iron animal. That comparison feels right. The engine seems alive. Powerful. Hot. Restless. A whistle sounds. Passengers board. Mail is loaded. Freight secured. Then wheels begin turning. Slowly at first. Then faster. The train pulls west through open land once crossed only by wagon horse and raw determination. The pioneer world is changing. Not ending. Not yet. But changing. The wilderness is still vast. Yet iron now cuts through it. And every mile of rail makes the frontier feel a little smaller. A little faster. A little less wild. War does not need to reach your doorstep to enter your life. Sometimes it arrives through absence. An empty chair at supper. A delayed shipment. A letter folded too carefully. A silence that grows longer each week. That is how the American Civil War reaches the frontier. Not always through battle. Through disruption. By 1861, much of the American West still feels distant from the major eastern battlefields. The great armies clash far away in places most frontier families will never see. Yet distance does not create immunity. War bends the entire nation, including settlements scattered across plains, mining camps, ranches, and wagon routes. The frontier feels it. Quietly at first, then everywhere. Historians at Princeton University note that the Civil War reshaped Western development by redirecting military resources, altering migration patterns, accelerating federal authority, and expanding strategic infrastructure. In plain language, even remote settlers feel the strain. Because war changes systems, and pioneers depend on fragile systems. Your mind drifts to a homestead in Kansas during the early war years. Wind presses against rough wooden walls. A family sits around supper eating beans, coarse bread and thin stew. The meal feels ordinary. The conversation does not. A son talks about enlistment. A father says little. A mother says less. Silence carries weight. Because military service means absence. Absence means labour shortage. Labour shortage means crops at risk, livestock neglected, repairs delayed. One missing pair of hands matters enormously. Especially on the frontier. Research from University of Chicago suggests that labour scarcity during wartime had disproportionate effects in frontier settlements, where households already operated near minimal labour capacity. That makes perfect sense. A city can absorb labour loss. A remote farm struggles. War also sharpens political tension in border regions. Nowhere is this clearer than in Kansas, where conflict over slavery had already turned violent before the official war began. The era known as Bleeding Kansas leaves scars that remain fresh. Neighbour distrust becomes dangerous. Very dangerous. People who once traded goods may now avoid eye contact. Conversations about union, slavery, secession, and loyalty can turn volatile with astonishing speed. Words become loaded. Careless opinions carry consequences. For a moment it feels as though even geography becomes political. Which side are you on? That question enters cabins, shops, churches, and wagon camps. And there is no comfortable answer for many families. Not every household agrees internally. Brothers may support different causes. Communities fracture along ideological lines. Some choose silence just to preserve peace. Silence becomes survival. Supply chains grow unstable as wartime demand rises. Iron ammunition, cloth medicine, and manufactured goods become harder to obtain or more expensive. Even basic household items feel less reliable. Scarcity returns. It always waits nearby. One intimate detail from frontier letters appears repeatedly during wartime. Coffee shortages deeply affected morale. Families stretched supplies, substituted roasted grains, or rationed carefully. That sounds small. It was not. Small comforts matter most during stress. Ask anyone deprived of caffeine. Military presence across the West also changes. Although the Civil War draws major troop deployments eastward, frontier forts remain strategically important. Federal forces must protect wagon routes, telegraph lines, mail routes, and settlements. The frontier does not pause during war. Migration continues. Rail construction continues. Conflict with native nations continues. Everything overlaps. Historians at Stanford University emphasize that the Civil War indirectly accelerated federal involvement in Western expansion by strengthening centralized authority and infrastructure investment. War strengthened state power. Repeatedly, the federal government increasingly influences transportation, land policy, and settlement patterns. During the war, Congress passes measures with enormous long-term frontier consequences, including the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railway Act. Remarkable timing! Even during Civil War, expansion continues, perhaps especially during Civil War. The Homestead Act offers settlers land for a small fee if they improve and live on it for several years. That policy matters enormously. Land ownership becomes more accessible. Dreams intensify. Meanwhile, the Pacific Railway Act supports transcontinental railroad construction, accelerating future Western settlement. War and expansion become intertwined. Opportunity and conflict move together. Native communities also face intensifying pressure during this period. Reduced military capacity in some regions creates temporary shifts in power, while settler expansion continues advancing into indigenous territory. Violence increases in several frontier zones. Trust decreases further. This pattern feels tragically familiar. Land pressure rarely eases. One painful example is the Dakota War of 1862, rooted in broken treaties, delayed payments, hunger, and rising desperation among the Dakota people. Desperation changes behavior fast. When food runs out, politics becomes survival. That truth appears repeatedly in frontier conflict. Historians still debate how much frontier violence during the Civil War years stemmed directly from wartime military redistribution versus longer structural tensions over land and resources. Scholars at Harvard University suggest the war amplified existing pressures rather than creating entirely new ones. That feels accurate. The fire already burned. War added fuel. You notice emotional fatigue spreading across frontier households. The burden is cumulative. Hard labor was already constant. Now uncertainty deepens. News of casualties travels slowly but lands heavily. Letters become emotional lifelines. A folded letter can change everything. A death notice, a survival update, a promise to return, or no letter at all. Sometimes silence hurts most. Children sense tension even when adults hide it. They notice whispered conversations, delayed smiles, and sudden tears after reading mail. They understand more than adults hope, always. Yet life on the frontier refuses to stop. Fields still need planting, animals still need care, roofs still leak, babies are still born, weddings still happen, bread still burns occasionally. Life insists on continuing, even during war. Tonight you sit inside a frontier cabin during winter. Dirty snow gathers outside the door. Wood smoke hangs thick near the ceiling. A mother folds a letter for the 10th time. A father stares into the fire longer than usual. No one speaks. The chair remains empty. Everyone notices. No one mentions it. Somewhere Far East armies march under cold skies. Somewhere West rail crews lay track across frozen ground. Somewhere in between, pioneers keep enduring. The frontier remains restless. War has reached it. Not always with cannon, sometimes with absence, sometimes with waiting, sometimes with silence so heavy it feels louder than battle. And still the American West keeps moving toward its next transformation. The prairie looks peaceful from a distance. Too peaceful. Grass ripples under open sky in long silver waves. Wind moves gently across miles of open land. Meadowlarks call from fence posts. Sunlight warms the earth with deceptive kindness. It looks inviting, almost easy. That illusion has misled many people. After the American Civil War, a new wave of settlers surges westward into the Great Plains, drawn by opportunity policy and renewed ambition. The frontier is no longer merely a place to pass through. Increasingly, families intend to stay, to root, to build permanently. The Homestead Act helps drive this transformation. Under its terms, settlers can claim land, improve it, and gain ownership after meeting residency and cultivation requirements. The promise sounds irresistible. 160 acres, your own land, legally yours. That phrase changes lives. Historians at Harvard University note that the Homestead Act became one of the most influential land policies in American history, encouraging hundreds of thousands of settlers to establish farms across Western territories. But policy sells possibility. Nature determines reality, and the Great Plains are not gentle. You arrive with a homesteading family somewhere in Nebraska, Kansas, or the emerging territories farther north. The first thing you notice is scale. Sky dominates everything. There are few trees. Very few. That becomes a problem immediately. No trees means limited lumber. Limited lumber means no easy cabin, no easy firewood, no easy fencing. The prairie offers land, not convenience. Research from University of Chicago emphasizes that environmental mismatch challenged many settlers who arrived expecting forest-style farming methods unsuited to plains ecology. That mismatch proves brutal. Many eastern farming instincts fail here. Your mind drifts to a newly claimed homestead. There is no cabin yet, no barn, no well, no shade. Just open grass and relentless wind. So where do you live? Sometimes underground, or partly underground. One of the most iconic plains homes becomes the sod house, often called a soddy. Settlers cut thick strips of prairie grass and root-packed earth, stacking them like giant bricks. Imagine building walls from dirt, because that is exactly what happens. The walls insulate surprisingly well. Cool in summer, warm in winter, practical. Also messy, very messy. One intimate detail from homesteader letters appears constantly. Bugs and mice loved sod houses, loved them. Crumbs attracted pests, loose dirt fell from ceilings, rain occasionally dripped mud, frontier luxury, nature indoors, uninvited. Still a roof is a roof, and survival values function over elegance. Water becomes the next major challenge. Reliable wells require labour luck and equipment. Surface water may be distant or seasonal. Carrying water consumes enormous energy. Again, simple tasks refuse to remain simple. The wind also becomes a permanent companion. Prairie wind does not politely visit. It dominates. Doors slam hard, dust blows indoors, laundry whips violently on lines. In winter, wind amplifies cold until exposed skin burns. The prairie teaches respect. Quickly, historians at Stanford University suggest many settlers underestimated psychological strain caused by environmental exposure on the open plains, where isolation and weather intensity shaped mental health profoundly. That feels true. The plains can feel lonely in a way forests do not. Forests surround. Prairie exposes. Nothing blocks distance. For a moment it feels as though the sky itself is watching you. Crop success becomes uncertain. Rainfall varies. Drought threatens constantly. Too little rain destroys crops. Too much rain floods fields. Hail can erase months of labour in minutes. Minutes. That imbalance feels cruel. A family may plough, plant weed and pray for months only to watch a storm erase everything. No insurance, no safety net, just loss. One intimate human detail from Homestead Diary stays with you. Many settlers measured hope by cloud movement. A dark rain cloud on the horizon could transform mood instantly. Hope becomes meteorological. Clouds matter emotionally. So does grass. The prairie grass itself resists cultivation. Dense root systems make ploughing difficult, especially with older equipment. breaking sod becomes back-breaking labour. Steel helps. That matters later. But for now, sweat does most of the work. Children remain essential labour. Water hauling, animal care, field assistance, cooking help and supply management all require many hands. Family size becomes economic strategy. More hands, more survival. Social isolation remains severe. Neighbours may live miles apart. Visiting requires planning and weather cooperation. Church gatherings, schoolhouses, and community dances become treasured social anchors. Humans still need community. Always. Without it, loneliness sharpens. Historians still debate why some homesteaders persisted through repeated hardship while others abandoned claims quickly. Scholars at Yale University suggest resilience often depended less on individual toughness and more on access to capital tools, community support, and adaptive knowledge. That is important. Success is not pure grit. Grit helps. Resources help too. This complicates frontier mythology. Popular memory often celebrates rugged individualism, but survival on the plains frequently depended on cooperation. Borrowing seed, sharing labour, helping rebuild after storms, watching neighbours during illness. Mutual aid mattered. A lot. One harsh winter can expose everything. Snow piles against doors, livestock struggle to feed, fuel runs low, wind pushes cold through every weakness in walls. Frozen fingers return. So does fear. A weak roof, an empty pantry, a sick child. These remain frontier nightmares, and yet many families endure. More than endure, they build. Farms expand, wells improve, communities stabilize, schools appear. Grain markets grow, churches rise from grassland, windmills begin dotting the horizon. The plains slowly change. Not overnight, but steadily. You return to evening inside a sod house. The air smells of soup earth and faint lamp oil. A lantern glows warm against dirt walls. Outside, wind rolls endlessly across open land. Inside, a child sleeps. A mother sows. A father studies next season's seed. No one says much. Exhaustion has become familiar. So has determination. The prairie is not easy. It never was. But the family remains. One season completed, then another. Roots deepening. Not only crops, people too. The frontier has changed again. Wagons once crossed this land in search of somewhere better. Now settlers stop here, claim it, shape it, and learn often painfully that the plains demand something different from pioneers. Not movement, endurance. The silence feels wrong. Too empty, too clean. You ride across open plains where something essential seems missing, though at first you cannot name it. The grass still moves in long, windswept waves. The sky still stretches endlessly. Rivers still cut silver lines through the land. But the great dark movement is gone. No thunder of hooves. No shifting black horizon. No endless herds. The buffalo are disappearing, and with them an entire world. For centuries the American bison has shaped life across the Great Plains. Massive herds numbering in the tens of millions once moved across the continent, influencing ecology, migration routes, trade, spirituality and survival for many native nations. They are more than animals, much more. They are food, clothing, shelter tools, fuel, ceremony and identity. Almost nothing goes to waste. Hide becomes robes, bedding, shields and lodge coverings. Bones become tools, sinew becomes cord. Meat feeds communities through harsh winters. Even dried dung fuels fire where timber remains scarce. The buffalo sustain civilizations. That truth cannot be overstated. Historians at Harvard University note that bison functioned as a keystone species on the plains, meaning their presence shaped both ecological balance and human survival across enormous regions. Remove them and systems collapse. That collapse has begun. By the 1860s and 1870s, buffalo numbers decline at terrifying speed. Railroads, commercial hunting, settlement expansion, hide markets and military strategy all contribute to destruction. The scale feels unreal. Tens of millions become thousands in astonishingly little time. Your mind drifts to a train crossing the plains. Passengers lean from windows, rifles appear, shots ring out. Some travellers casually fire at buffalo from moving trains for sport. Sport. Pause there. That word hurts. Animals that sustained entire cultures become entertainment. Research from University of Chicago shows industrial hide demand accelerated slaughter dramatically, especially after improved tanning methods increased commercial value of buffalo hides. Markets again. Always markets. When money enters ecosystems, destruction can scale rapidly. Professional hunters arrive in large numbers. Teams skin carcasses efficiently. Hides ship east. Bones later get collected for industrial uses. Carcasses often rot where they fall. The smell becomes unforgettable. Rotting flesh under hot wind. Decay across open grass. A landscape of waste. One intimate detail from period accounts feels haunting. Travellers described plains littered with bleached buffalo bones stretching toward the horizon. Imagine that sight. White bone under blue sky. Miles of absence. The ecological consequences are enormous. Predator patterns change. Grasslands shift. Water access routes alter. But the human consequences cut deepest for native nations, whose economies and cultures remain tightly tied to buffalo migration. Food security collapses. Mobility weakens. Dependency increases. Hunger becomes political. Historians at Stanford University emphasize that buffalo destruction was not merely environmental tragedy, but a major factor in plains conflict because weakening buffalo-dependent communities also weakened resistance capacity. That truth is uncomfortable, because destruction becomes strategy, not accident. The Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, and many others face intensifying pressure. Settler expansion advances. Railroads cut migration routes. Hunting grounds shrink. Treaty promises repeatedly fracture under expansion. Conflict escalates. Fast. For a moment it feels as though two futures are colliding head-on. One future sees fenced farms, rail depots, telegraph lines, and permanent settlement. The other fights to preserve mobility, hunting culture, autonomy, and ancestral lifeways. Both cannot fully coexist in the same form. That brutal reality drives war. Frontier forts expand military presence across contested regions. Soldiers escort surveyors, protect rail construction, and enforce federal policy. Tension becomes constant. A patrol on the plains never fully relaxes. Dust clouds on the horizon could mean traders, or danger. Or both. One intimate human detail from cavalry records stands out. Soldiers hated plains dust almost as much as settlers did. Dust entered rifles, boots, food bedding, and lungs. The frontier remains loyal to dust, relentlessly. The Indian wars of the post-Civil War era involve many conflicts rather than one single war. Raids, skirmishes, treaty breakdowns, retaliatory attacks, forced relocations, and military campaigns create years of violence. The pattern repeats. Pressure, resistance, retaliation, escalation. Communities on all sides live under fear. Settler families worry about raids and isolation. Native communities fear military attack, starvation, and broken agreements. Fear mirrors itself. Again, that mirror remains painful. Historians still debate whether specific frontier conflicts were primarily driven by cultural misunderstanding, military escalation, economic pressure, or deliberate expansionist policy. Scholars at Yale University generally conclude all factors interacted rather than operating separately. That complexity matters. Simple explanations fail. Consider the Red Cloud's War. Native resistance successfully challenges US military expansion in parts of the northern plains, forcing temporary concessions. Resistance can succeed, at least briefly, but expansion pressure returns. It always returns. Then comes the Battle of the Little Bighorn, one of the most famous frontier battles. Forces led by George Armstrong Custer suffered devastating defeat against combined native forces. News shocks the nation. Custer becomes legend. So does the battle. Yet the broader trajectory does not reverse. Military pressure intensifies afterward. Native autonomy continues shrinking. Reservation systems expand. Movement becomes restricted. Hunting patterns collapse. Dependence on federal supplies grows. The old Plains world contracts. Rapidly, one intimate detail from reservation accounts feels especially tragic. Many elders worried not only about hunger but cultural memory. What happens when children no longer follow buffalo? What knowledge disappears? That question reaches beyond food. It reaches identity. Tonight you stand on the plains under fading sunset. Wind moves through grass with ancient rhythm. In the distance, a small surviving herd of buffalo grazes dark shapes against gold light. Beautiful, quiet, diminished. The plains still look vast, but something essential has changed. The pioneer era once meant movement into open land. Now the land itself is being transformed. Wild abundance gives way to controlled settlement. Mobility gives way to fences. Herds give way to rails. And the cost of that transformation lies scattered across the prairie. In bone, in memory, in silence. The first strand looks almost harmless. Thin wire. Small metal barbs twisted at intervals. Nothing about it appears revolutionary. It certainly does not look like something capable of changing the American frontier, but it does. Completely. Sometimes history turns not on dramatic speeches or famous battles, but on ordinary inventions that quietly alter how humans live. This is one of those moments. By the 1870s and 1880s, the American West enters a new phase. The age of endless open movement begins yielding to an age of control ownership and infrastructure. Technology becomes the great accelerator. New tools do not merely make pioneer life easier, they reshape power itself. Historians at Harvard University note that late 19th century Western settlement depended increasingly on technological adaptation, especially in agriculture, communication, and land management. That sounds broad. In daily life, it means survival starts relying less on brute endurance alone and more on systems, machines, and engineered solutions. Your mind drifts to a homestead on the Great Plains in the 1870s. Wind rolls across open grass. A farmer stands beside coils of newly purchased barbed wire. He studies it with cautious optimism. Then he begins stretching it between wooden posts. The invention of barbed wire changes everything. Before barbed wire fencing large areas of prairie is expensive and difficult. Timber is scarce across many plains regions. Traditional wooden fences require enormous labour and materials. Open range dominates because enclosure remains impractical. Barbed wire solves that problem with brutal efficiency. Cheap, portable, effective, painfully effective. Livestock quickly learn respect. So do people. One intimate detail from ranch accounts appears often. Cattle touch barbed wire once and usually remembered forever. Pain became teacher, fast. Research from University of Chicago shows barbed wire dramatically accelerated privatization of Western land by making enclosure affordable across vast treeless plains. Open range begins shrinking, that matters deeply. For decades, cattle ranchers, cowboys, farmers, and homesteaders operated within a landscape where boundaries remained fluid. Now, fences appear. Boundaries harden. Conflict follows. Ranchers dislike block trails. Farmers protect crops. Water access becomes contested. Land once crossed freely now carries ownership. The psychological shift is enormous. The West feels different when movement requires permission. Fences create order. They also create resentment. For a moment, it feels as though the frontier is learning a new language. Not motion, ownership, mine, yours. Keep out. Another invention transforms agriculture just as dramatically. The steel plough improved by companies like John Deere allows farmers to cut through tough prairie sod far more efficiently than earlier wooden or cast iron designs. This matters because prairie grass roots are stubborn beyond reason. Dense, thick, interlocked, almost defensive. Early ploughs clog constantly. Steel changes the equation. Suddenly, land once considered nearly impossible to farm becomes more manageable. Not easy, just possible. That distinction matters. Historians at Stanford University emphasize that agricultural technology enabled settlement patterns that earlier generations could not realistically sustain on the plains. Machines create permanence. One intimate human detail from farm records stands out. Farmers often judged equipment emotionally, almost like companions. A reliable plough earned affection. A broken machine earned very creative anger. Understandable. When survival depends on equipment, tools stop being objects. They become partners. Then comes communication. The telegraph spreads across the continent, often following railroad routes. This invention may feel less dramatic than railroads or fencing, but its psychological impact is astonishing. News that once took weeks now travels in minutes. Minutes. Pause on that. Storm warning, market price update, family emergency, election result, military movement. Information no longer crawls, it flashes. Research from Yale University suggests telegraph networks fundamentally changed commercial decision-making in frontier economies by reducing uncertainty in pricing and coordination. Uncertainty decreases, markets tighten, isolation weakens. Your frontier town feels different now. The depot has telegraph wires stretching into distance. Messages click through metal lines with strange mechanical urgency. Most people cannot decode the signals. Still, they feel the power. Somewhere far away, someone sends words through wire. It almost feels magical. One intimate detail from telegraph offices remains charming. Curious townspeople often gathered nearby waiting for important messages, treating the office as both communication centre and rumour factory. Some traditions survive technology. People still gather for news, always. Technology also changes domestic life gradually. Manufactured goods become more available. Sewing machines reduce labour for some households. Improved stoves change cooking efficiency. Windmills pump water more reliably across dry plains. Windmills matter enormously. You see them turning against wide skies, slow and steady. Water rises from underground. Livestock drink. Gardens survive. Families remain. Such a simple mechanism. Such enormous consequence. Historians still debate whether technological progress reduced hardship evenly across the frontier or primarily benefited settlers with capital and market access. Scholars at Princeton University argue access inequality remained significant. That feels right. Technology helps, only if you can afford it. Wealth shapes adoption. Poor homesteaders may still rely heavily on manual labour while prosperous farms mechanize faster. Progress arrives unevenly, always. You also notice a cultural shift. Earlier pioneers measured resilience through physical endurance alone. Now success increasingly depends on adaptation investment and integration into larger economic systems. The frontier becomes less about pure survival and more about competitiveness. Market prices matter more. Crop yield efficiency matters more. Transport timing matters more. Systems tighten around daily life. The mythic lone pioneer grows less representative. Networks matter now. Railroads, banks, equipment suppliers, telegraph lines, credit systems, civilization thickens. Tonight you stand beside a fenced prairie field at dusk. Barbed wire catches fading sunlight like thin silver fire. A windmill turns slowly nearby. Telegraph wires hum faintly overhead. In the distance, a train whistle echoes across land once crossed only by wagons and hoofbeats. The sound lingers. The frontier is changing again. Not vanishing, not yet. But the old open west is narrowing. Movement becomes bounded. Distance becomes smaller. Isolation becomes thinner. And every strand of wire, every steel blade, every clicking telegraph key pulls the pioneer world closer to something new. Something more modern. Something less wild. The storm gives no warning, or at least no warning that matters. Morning begins almost peacefully. The sky is pale grey. Wind feels ordinary. Livestock move slowly across frost-stiff grass. A child steps outside carrying a bucket, noticing only that the air feels sharper than yesterday. Then the world changes. Fast. The plains have always been beautiful from a distance. Endless grass, open sky, soft horizons. But by the 1870s and 1880s, settlers learn a hard truth that older native communities already understood well. Nature rules here. Always. No fence railroad, telegraph wire or steel plough changes that fact. The land allows settlement. It does not surrender power. Historians at Stanford University note that environmental volatility remained one of the greatest threats to late frontier settlement, with weather repeatedly destroying economic progress built over years. That feels almost cruel. A family may spend 5 years building stability. One storm can erase it. You stand on the Great Plains somewhere in Nebraska or Dakota Territory as winter tightens. The wind begins rising. Snow appears in small drifting grains, nothing dramatic yet. Then visibility collapses. A blizzard. Not gentle snowfall. Not picturesque winter. A wall of white. Wind screams across open land with terrifying force. Snow whips sideways sharp as sand against exposed skin. The horizon disappears. Fence lines vanish. Even nearby buildings fade into white chaos. Direction dies first. That is the true terror. Up still feels up. Everything else becomes uncertain. Research from University of Chicago suggests exposure deaths on the plains often occurred astonishingly close to shelter, because disorientation in blizzard conditions destroyed spatial judgment. Pause on that. People died within yards of home, because they could not see it. That detail chills deeper than the cold itself. Inside a homestead, panic stays quiet but intense. Doors are reinforced, windows checked, extra blankets gathered, fire fed constantly. Fuel suddenly matters more than money, much more. One intimate detail from settler diaries appears often. Wet mittens drying near stoves filled cabins with a distinct wool and steam smell during storms. That smell became comfort, proof of warmth, proof of shelter, proof of life. Livestock face brutal risk. Cattle caught in open exposure may freeze standing. Horses turn their backs to wind and endure if they can. Chickens huddle uselessly, contributing little beyond anxiety. As usual, some traditions never change. Children sense danger even when adults stay calm. Voices lower, movements sharpen. Every sound outside becomes ominous. Wind against walls. Snow piling against doors. Wood cracking in the stove. The storm feels alive. For a moment it feels as though the prairie itself has become hostile consciousness. Not evil, just indifferent. That difference matters. Nature does not hate you, it simply does not care. Blizzards are only one enemy. Drought brings slower suffering. During dry years, clouds refuse generosity. Weeks pass, then months. Soil hardens, grass yellows, crops weaken. Hope dries with them. Each morning begins with sky watching. Still no rain. Again. Still nothing. Historians at Harvard University emphasize that drought cycles repeatedly expose the fragile assumptions of plains settlement, especially where optimistic land promotion ignored rainfall realities. That sounds familiar. Overpromising land. Underestimating weather. A timeless mistake. One intimate human detail from drought letters remains haunting. Settlers described listening for rain on roofs that never came until silence itself felt oppressive. Silence becomes weather. That idea stays with you. Then comes dust. Dry soil loosens. Wind lifts fine earth into air. It settles inside homes, coats, dishes, enters lungs and grinds into bedding. Dust again. The frontier remains committed to recurring themes. Dust in summer. Snow in winter. Mud whenever possible. Grasshopper infestations bring another nightmare. Huge swarms descend on crops with astonishing efficiency. Fields that look promising in morning may appear shredded by evening. Stripped. Bare! Gone. Research from Yale University documents devastating Rocky Mountain locust swarms in the late 19th century that caused catastrophic crop losses across western farms. Millions of insects, billions perhaps, enough to darken skies. Imagine hearing them before seeing them. A dry rustling cloud, approaching hunger. Farmers fight back with smoke trenches, noise, prayer and desperation. Mostly desperation. Little works. Sometimes survival means borrowing seed for next season. Again, always one season from crisis. Historians still debate whether technological progress encouraged dangerous overconfidence among settlers confronting plains weather. Scholars at Princeton University suggest railroads and improved equipment reduce some risks while simultaneously encouraging settlement in marginal regions. That irony matters. Technology expands possibility. It can also expand exposure. More settlers in harsher regions means more people vulnerable when systems fail. And systems do fail. Repeatedly. Yet what remains remarkable is not only hardship, it is persistence. Families rebuild after storms, replant after hail, restock after livestock losses, repair roofs, dig out snowed indoors, borrow supplies, help neighbours. Community becomes survival multiplier. A barn raising after tornado damage becomes more than labour. It becomes declaration. We remain. That spirit defines much of late pioneer life. Stubborn endurance. Not glamorous. Not loud. Just relentless. You return to winter night inside a prairie home. The blizzard still rages outside. Snow presses hard against walls. The lantern flickers as wind finds tiny cracks in the structure. Inside warmth holds. Barely. A mother wraps another blanket around a child. A father feeds split wood into the stove and quietly calculates remaining fuel. That calculation feels heavy. How much wood left? How long will the storm last? No easy answers. Only waiting. Morning eventually comes. It always does. The storm weakens, wind softens, light returns. Then the door opens. The world outside has changed. Drifts taller than fences. Buried paths, frozen animals, broken structures. Silence so complete it feels sacred. And yet smoke rises from neighbouring homes. That matters. Smoke means survival. Someone made it. Someone endured. The plains have spoken again. Their message remains consistent. You may settle here, you may build here, but never forget who truly commands this land. Not railroads, not fences, not markets. Weather, always weather. Something subtle changes near the end. No trumpet sounds. No official voice announces that an era has closed. The frontier simply begins to feel smaller, not physically, of course. The plains remain vast. Mountains still tower, rivers still carve ancient paths through the land. But psychologically something shifts in the final decades of the 19th century. Blank spaces disappear, the unknown shrinks, and with that the pioneer age begins fading into memory. By the 1880s, the American West is no longer the same world that pioneers entered after the Louisiana Purchase. Railroads span the continent. Telegraph lines connect distant settlements. Fences divide open range. Towns multiply. Territorial governments strengthen. Markets tighten. The wilderness remains, but the frontier is closing. Historians at Harvard University note that the closing frontier represented less a sudden physical event and more a gradual transformation in settlement density, infrastructure and perception. That distinction matters. The frontier does not vanish overnight. Its spirit changes first. Your mind drifts to a town that once felt remote in the 1850s. Back then, a wagon arrival caused excitement. Mail came irregularly. Supplies felt precious. News travelled slowly. Isolation defined identity. Now the town feels different. A train arrives on schedule. Merchants track prices by telegraph. Children attend school regularly. Store shelves carry manufactured goods from eastern factories. Distance feels domesticated. That word fits. Domesticated. The West is becoming integrated into a larger national system. Research from University of Chicago suggests that market integration and infrastructure expansion transformed frontier households from relatively isolated subsistence units into participants in increasingly national economic networks. In plain English, pioneer independence becomes more complicated. You still work hard, but now banks matter, rail schedules matter, commodity prices matter, debt matters, markets matter. The lone self-sufficient pioneer becomes more myth than reality. Not false, just incomplete. One intimate detail from late frontier diaries feels revealing. Store-bought goods became increasingly common and emotionally meaningful. Factory-made clothing, canned food, improved tools, and household goods symbolize connection to modern life. A tin can may sound unromantic. To a remote family, it could feel luxurious. Convenience carries emotional weight. Cattle ranching changes too. The age of vast open-range cattle drives begins declining. Barbed wire fences restrict movement. Harsh winters, especially during the devastating winter of 1886 to 1887, destroy enormous herds across the plains. Nature delivers one final correction. Cold again. Always cold. The great die-up becomes catastrophic for many ranchers. Blizzards, deep snow, and brutal cold kill massive numbers of cattle. The message is familiar. Technology helps. Weather still wins. Historians at Stanford University argue the Great Die-Up accelerated the transition from open-range ranching to more controlled fenced and capital-intensive livestock management. The old cowboy frontier narrows. Romance meets economics. Economics wins. Native resistance also reaches tragic culmination in these decades. Reservation systems expand further. Federal assimilation policies intensify. Children are increasingly sent to boarding schools designed to suppress indigenous languages, traditions, and identity. This chapter remains painful. Deeply painful. Communities that once moved with buffalo herds now face confinement, surveillance, dependency, and cultural erasure efforts. Loss extends beyond land. It reaches memory, language, inheritance. For a moment, it feels as though the closing frontier creates winners and losers too simplistically in popular mythology. Reality is harder. Some settlers prosper. Some fail. Some native communities endure through adaptation and resistance. Some suffer devastating cultural rupture. History resists clean endings. One symbolic milestone comes in 1890 when the United States Census Bureau declares that a distinct frontier line can no longer be clearly identified. That statement becomes famous. The frontier is officially closed, at least statistically. Historians still debate what that declaration truly means. Scholars at Yale University emphasize that frontier conditions persisted in many regions long after 1890, making closure more symbolic than literal. That feels right, because culture lingers, even after maps change. Still, symbolism matters. An age has ended. The psychological effect is profound. Americans begin mythologizing the pioneer era almost immediately. Stories grow larger. Hardship becomes legend. Survival becomes heroism. Complexity often gets simplified into cleaner narratives. Memory edits. Always. Violence softens. Ambiguity fades. Heroes sharpen. Villains simplify. Reality becomes story. One intimate human detail from late 19th century memoirs stands out. Older pioneers often described feeling strange when returning to former trail routes, now crossed by rail lines, fenced farms, and growing towns. Recognition mixed with disorientation. This was once empty. Now it is not. That emotional transition feels powerful. The land they struggled across has become ordinary geography for a younger generation. Children born in the 1880s inherit a different West than their grandparents imagined. They may still hear stories of wagon crossings and sod houses, but they grow up with schools, trains towns, newspapers, and expanding commerce. They inherit memory more than wilderness. That changes identity. The pioneer becomes ancestor, not current self, yet traces remain everywhere. Old wagon ruts still scar certain landscapes. Abandoned cabins decay slowly. Cemetery stones mark forgotten settlements. Family stories survive around dinner tables. Remember the crossing. Remember the blizzard. Remember the first winter. Remember what it took. Stories preserve what infrastructure erases. Tonight you stand beside railroad tracks at dusk somewhere on the plains. Telegraph wires hum overhead. Fence fields stretch toward the horizon. In the distance, town lights glow warm against darkening sky. A train passes. Fast. Too fast to imagine for early pioneers. Smoke trails behind steel. Then silence returns. The land remains vast, but not unknown, not wild in the old way. The frontier has not disappeared. It has changed form, and the pioneer age, once lived in sweat and dust and raw uncertainty, now begins its transformation into memory. Night settles slowly across the American West. The last light fades from prairie grass. Mountains become dark silhouettes against a deep blue sky. A distant train whistle echoes softer now, almost mournful. Wind moves through fence wire with a faint metallic hum. Somewhere, a lantern burns inside a farmhouse built on land that once existed only as rumour on a map. And you realise something. The story was never only about moving west. It was about becoming something new. That is the true legacy of the American pioneer. By 1890, the great age of westward settlement has largely ended. The frontier that once represented uncertainty, danger, reinvention and ambition has become increasingly settled, mapped, governed, fenced and economically integrated. Yet the pioneer spirit remains deeply embedded in American identity. Not because every pioneer succeeded, many did not. Not because every journey ended in prosperity, many ended in loss. And certainly not because the pioneer story is morally simple. It is not. Historians at Harvard University often emphasize that the American pioneer experience resists clean celebration or clean condemnation because it contains profound achievement alongside profound dispossession. That is perhaps the most honest way to understand it. Both truths remain. Always. You cannot tell this story honestly without recognizing courage. Families crossed continents with limited knowledge, minimal safety, and extraordinary physical hardship. They built homes from sod logs and sheer stubbornness. They endured drought, blizzard, hunger, loneliness, disease, and uncertainty. That endurance matters. Deeply. Your mind drifts back through everything you have witnessed tonight. The signing of the Louisiana Purchase, the journeys of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, the first cabins rising from forests, wagons grinding through mud, children carrying water with tired arms, women rebuilding fire before sunrise, wagon trains moving across endless prairie, dust everywhere, mud everywhere, cold everywhere, and hope everywhere too. That combination defines the pioneer world, hope and hardship, bound together. Research from Stanford University suggests frontier survival depended less on heroic individualism than popular mythology later claimed, and far more on networks of cooperation, shared labour infrastructure and community adaptation. That idea matters. Because myths often exaggerate the lone hero. Reality usually involves neighbours, borrowed tools, shared food, mutual aid, hands helping after storms. The American pioneer story is also inseparable from loss inflicted upon native nations. This truth must remain central, not optional. Expansion displaced communities, shattered treaties, destroyed buffalo economies, and imposed systems that profoundly disrupted indigenous life, culture, and sovereignty. That cost was real and lasting. Progress for one group often arrived as catastrophe for another. History becomes dangerous when it forgets that. For a moment, it feels as though the pioneer legacy demands maturity from anyone studying it. You must hold complexity without rushing toward comforting simplifications. That takes effort, but it matters. Historians still debate the psychological legacy of frontier culture. Scholars at Yale University and Princeton University continue exploring how frontier settlement shaped American values around independence, risk-taking, mobility, property, and reinvention. Those traits remain visible today. You can still feel them. The belief that you can start over, move elsewhere, build again, reinvent yourself. That may be one of the strongest pioneer inheritances. Not the wagon, not the rifle, not the cabin. The mindset. Start again. One intimate detail from late pioneer memoirs stays with you. Many older settlers remembered not grand historic moments first, but small domestic ones. The first loaf of bread in a new oven, the first calf surviving winter, the first rain after drought, the first harvest that truly felt secure. Small victories. That feels right. Because life is mostly built from ordinary moments. Not headlines. The frontier eventually produced myths larger than reality. Popular culture created cowboys, gunfighters, outlaws, heroic sheriffs, noble settlers, and dramatic showdowns. Some reflect fragments of truth. Only fragments. The quieter reality was harder and more human. Most pioneers were not legends. They were tired. They worried about crops. They worried about children. They worried about weather. They worried about debt. And yet they kept going. That persistence deserves respect. Tonight you stand in imagination between two worlds. Behind you lies the old frontier of blank maps, wagon ruts, campfires, and uncertain horizons. Ahead lies modern America, increasingly industrial, connected, mechanized, and fast. The transition feels strange. The old world does not vanish instantly. It lingers, in habits, in memory, in family stories, in inherited values. Even now, across the American landscape, traces remain. Old wagon ruts still cut faint lines through earth. Ghost towns sleep under wide skies. Prairie winds still sound much as they did 2 centuries ago. Rivers still flow west and south without caring about human ambition. Nature remembers differently, quietly, without nostalgia, without myth, just continuity. You breathe in cool night air. The stars overhead feel ancient, unchanged, since the first settlers stared upward in exhausted silence after another hard day on the trail. Those stars watched explorers, pioneers, native nations, soldiers, ranchers, miners, and homesteaders all pass beneath them. Empires change. Land changes. People change. Stars keep watching. And perhaps that is the most calming thought of all. Human struggle feels enormous while we live it. Yet time softens noise. What once felt overwhelming becomes story. What once felt impossible becomes memory. What once felt like the end becomes simply one chapter in a much longer journey. The pioneers could not see the full future they helped create. No generation ever can. They simply lived forward, one day at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 winter at a time. And perhaps that is enough. As this long journey comes to rest, think about what part of the pioneer story stayed with you most. Was it the wagon crossings, the prairie storms, the mountain passes, the sod houses, the women holding families together, or the quiet courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary uncertainty? Let that thought linger. If this story gave you something meaningful tonight, I would love to hear what part stayed with you most in the comments. Your reflections always make these journeys richer. And if you're ready for another slow journey into the past, there is another story waiting for you on this channel. Until then, rest well. Sleep deeply, and may peace find your home tonight.